Chapter 207. Wuxia was too big, and there were too many people. What happened to Wu Hui's family was not uncommon in the officialdom. The Great Han Empire and the Great Tang Empire, which used to be extremely powerful, would also collapse one day. Compared to them, what was the Wu family? Life and death were fated and could not be changed. As the supreme ruler of the world, the emperors of each dynasty held the power of life and death in their hands. They sat on 3,000 beauties, ate all kinds of delicacies, and wore all kinds of silk. But in the end, they all pursued the same thing, immortality. If Qianxi promised Wu Hui today to extend old Master Wu's life and help the Wu family out of this predicament, then, the threshold of the courtyard would probably be trampled flat by people who came to ask for medicine. Wu Hui's sudden departure seemed to have diluted the festive atmosphere. It was supposed to be a happy time for family reunion, but now everyone was silent. Qin Yongyan first looked at Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju, then turned to look at Qianxi. Only then did he pick up the juice and smiled at the little girl. "Nian, Grandpa taught you a poem. Do you want to learn it?" Hearing this, the little girl tilted her head and asked, "Poem? Grandpa, what is a poem?" "It's the same as a poem." "Have you recited a poem?" "Yes. Papa taught me to recite poems before." When it came to poems, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. Perhaps she wanted to show off, so before Qin Yongyan said anything, she took the initiative to recite it. "Goose, goose, goose, curving its neck to the sky. White feathers floating on the green water, red palms plucking the clear waves." This was what Qianxi taught her in Kangju district. He did not expect her to remember and recite it so fluently. Her performance won her applause from the audience. The family laughed and praised the little girl for being smart, which made her feel a little embarrassed. Seeing his daughter so smart, Qianxi also felt proud, so he could not help but reach out and pinch her little face, which made the little girl pout on the spot. "Papa, you're so annoying." Even the little one knows how to be shy. With her interruption, the atmosphere in the private room became much livelier. At this time, Qin Yongyan chuckled and said, "Nian, lyrics are like poems. Do you want to learn?" The little guy's performance in reciting the poem had won the cheers of the entire hall. This made her extremely proud, so she immediately nodded and replied, "Yes." "All right, then listen carefully." Qin Yongyan stood up and his entire aura suddenly changed. It was as if he had come to the riverside and was looking at the torrential river. He passionately chanted, "My name is Qin Yongyan. The rolling Yangtze River flows eastward, and the waves wash away all heroes. Right and wrong, success and failure are gone in the blink of an eye. The green hills are still there, and the sunset is still red." White-haired fisherman and woodcutter on the riverside, accustomed to the autumn moon and spring breeze. A pot of turbid wine was a happy reunion. So many things from the past to the present are just jokes. So many things from the past to the present were all jokes. After hearing this, Qin Yongwang couldn't help but tilt his head and look at Wang Chuanju. He instantly understood what Qin Yongyan wanted to express. He didn't really want to teach the little guy to recite the poem. He just wanted to use this as an excuse to express his opinion on this matter. Compared to Qin Yongyan and Qianxi's leisurely and complacent appearance, the couple's performance was indeed a bit too utilitarian. They were both martial artists, but because they had been in the Wu Lian government for a long time, they naturally couldn't avoid being contaminated with some official habits. However, this point was extremely detrimental to their martial arts cultivation. Qin Yongyan was giving them pointers, everyone was smart, so there was no need to say anything. Just a little pointers would be enough. This song, Riverside Immortal, was the theme song of the 1994 version of The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The little guy still hadn't watched The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, so this song was a bit too difficult for her to pronounce. Thus, after she rolled around for a long time, she found that she couldn't even remember the first line. Immediately, she pouted unhappily and shrank back into the chair. I can't recite it. I'm not going to recite it. Xianxia was afraid that she would be deeply affected, so he quickly smiled and comforted her. Nian Nian, be good. It's not your fault that you can't recite it. Don't be discouraged. This song is really too difficult. When you go to school in the future, you will naturally recite it. Hearing this, the little guy still looked unhappy. She turned her head and didn't talk to Xianxia. Her cute little appearance immediately made everyone laugh. Having a little one at home was like having a treasure. The little guy was now the happy fruit of the family. Her every frown and smile could affect the mood of the whole family. After lunch, the family left B16 and then drove to the bird's nest, ready to take the little guy there to ski. The bird's nest was happy during the ice and snow season. In fact, it was similar to the Shikahai ice rink, except that one was a frozen lake that turned into an ice rink, and the other was a snowy gymnasium that turned into a ski rink. There were only a few entertainment projects. The bird's nest had it, and the Shikahai also had it, but the little guy still had a lot of fun. She was now enjoying the supreme treatment. The whole family revolved around her. If she wanted something, she only needed to open her mouth. Naturally, her father or grandmother would run errands for her. This little guy was really spoiled to the sky. This spring festival was quite fulfilling. After the first day of the new year, in the next few days, the whole family drove around the capital to play. The whole family was mobilized just to make her have more fun. When the two brothers came back, they didn't know how the little guy would show off to them. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, it was the 5th day of the new year. Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju were the senior cadres of the Wu Yan. After a spring festival, there were still a lot of things waiting for them to go back to deal with. Therefore, they could only say goodbye to the little guy with slight regret. After a few days of getting along, the little guy had already recognized Wang Chuanju as her great-uncle and grandmother. Now that she heard that she was leaving, she immediately showed a reluctant look. Just as the little guy and Wang Chuanju were lovey-dovey and unwilling to part, Qin Shueqing suddenly found Xianxia. The set of skills you taught me, can I teach my parents? Although the sister-in-law's cultivation time was short, she had already tasted the sweetness of it. No matter what, she was still a daughter. Naturally, she wanted to show filial piety to her parents as soon as she had something good. Hearing this, Xianxia nodded. No matter what, they were still a family. Naturally, he couldn't be stingy. However, this set of skills was after all an immortal cultivator's skill. If it was spread out, it would definitely cause a huge impact on the existing cultivation system on Earth. It might even affect the existing social order on Earth. Such an outcome was obviously not what Xianxia wanted to see. Therefore, he could only use hints to warn his sister-in-law to keep it a secret. After Grandpa and Grandma left, the little guy was a little sad. However, Xianxia's words immediately made her eyes light up. Chapter 208. Go to Chengdu to see Grandma. This suggestion was very tempting for the little girl. The little girl had a good impression of Chengdu. Although she didn't like Kai Shuqin, her grandma was there. Therefore, after hearing Xianxia's suggestion, the little girl immediately jumped up and shouted excitedly, I want to go to Chengdu. I want to see Grandma. I want to go to Chengdu. I want to see Grandma. The family of 3 was standing outside the courtyard to send Qin Yongwang and his wife off. The little girl's sudden shout even startled Qin Yongwang and his wife, who had already walked to the entrance of the alley. While they were sending their grandparents off, she was already shouting about looking for Grandma. This was the reason why Xianxia didn't often mention Aunt Zhang. The little girl always listened to the wind and rain. Once she had an idea, she couldn't take it back. After sending Qin Yongwang and his wife off, Xianxia and his family returned to the West Wing and began to pack their luggage. During this time, Xianxia even asked his sister-in-law if she wanted to go to Chengdu with them, but his sister-in-law decisively refused. The family's general mobilization during the Spring Festival had already delayed a lot of time. Now that they were finally free, she naturally had to work overtime to cultivate and rush back. Therefore, after the family of 3 simply packed, Qianxi booked the plane tickets online. Shangjing to Chengdu. In 2 days, it would be the peak period to return to the city. Shangjing to Chengdu would only cost a few hundred yuan, but Chengdu to Shangjing would cost 3,000 to 4,000 yuan. It might even be impossible to buy a ticket. This was the right time to go to Chengdu. After booking the plane tickets, Qianxi suddenly thought of something. He quickly opened WeChat and sent a video call request to Aunt Zhang. He didn't know how the old lady spent the Spring Festival. If the family of 3 rushed over excitedly and found that Aunt Zhang wasn't in Chengdu, then it would be a wasted trip. As expected, Qianxi sent 2 video calls, but no one answered. Therefore, he had to call Aunt Zhang. Beep, beep, the phone rang for a long time. When Qianxi was about to give up, the phone finally connected. Hello, is this Brother Chen? It was not Auntie Zhang's voice, but Xia Pinglin's. He was slightly older than Qianxi, but after the previous incident, Xia Pinglin had indeed learned a lot, so he treated Qianxi as an elder brother. Xia Pinglin called him Brother Chen out of respect from the bottom of his heart. Yes, it's me. Where's Auntie Zhang? Why didn't she answer the phone? Ah, my mother is sick and hospitalized. Hearing this, Qianxi couldn't help but frown. What a joke. Auntie Zhang had already taken his elixir before she left Zhonghai, and the elixir she gave Ning Zhongguo wasn't even the simplified version. It wasn't that Qianxi wanted to boast, but this pill could make Auntie Zhang immune to all kinds of diseases. It wouldn't be a problem for her to live a long life. Now, Xia Pinglin was telling him that Aunt Zhang was hospitalized. Therefore, Qianxi's first reaction was to say, "You kidding? Are you King kidding me? What's going on? My mother suddenly fainted the day before yesterday. We sent her to the hospital, and the doctor said that it was very likely that she fainted due to insufficient blood supply to the brain. She needs to be hospitalized for a while to be sure. Is it serious? It shouldn't be a big problem. After she woke up, she just felt very tired, so she had to sleep for a long time every day. Which hospital are you in?" "Huaxi, okay, I'll call you when I arrive. Keep the phone connected." "Huh? You're coming to Chengdu?" Xia Pinglin was stunned for a moment, then hurriedly said, "My mother should be fine." "Brother Chen, you don't have to make a special trip." Xia Pinglin wanted to say a few polite words to Qianxi and tell him not to worry, but Qianxi hung up the phone. Then, Qianxi briefly told Qin Ruoying about Auntie Zhang's situation. Qin Ruoying didn't know the seriousness of the matter, but when she heard that Auntie Zhang was hospitalized, she was still very nervous, so she quickly carried the little girl and followed Qianxi to the airport in a taxi. It only took 3 hours from Shangjing to Chengdu. When they got off the plane, it was not even 5:00 in the afternoon. The family of 3 took a taxi and went straight to Huaxi Hospital. Many shops along the way were not open, and there were only a few scattered cars on the viaduct. Right now, Chengdu looked like an empty city. However, in fact, according to the comprehensive calculation of the National Tourism Administration's data center, the number of tourists received by Sichuan and Chongqing during the Spring Festival this year was the second highest in the country, second only to Yuezhou. As long as it was a holiday, tourist attractions would be full. Places like Chunxi Road, Jinli, Wuhou Temple, and Wenshu Courtyard were so crowded that the roads were closed. Although there was a place in Chengdu that was not a tourist attraction, it was more lively than a tourist attraction. Moreover, 365 days a year, it was lively every day as if it was the new year. This was Huaxi Hospital. After getting out of the taxi and seeing the dense crowd in front of him, Qianxi let the little girl ride on his shoulder while he held Qin Ruoying's hand and squeezed into the hospital. With so many patients, the beds were naturally very tight. When Chen Shi found Aunt Zhang's bed according to the address given by Xia Pinglin, he was so angry that he frowned. Aunt Zhang's bed was in the aisle. When he left, he had left a total of 1.8 million yuan in cash for Xia Pinglin. In the end, this was how Xia Pinglin treated Aunt Zhang. Xia Pinglin was serving the old lady water, so he did not notice Chen Shi and his family's arrival. The old lady's mental state was indeed very bad now. Her face was slightly sallow, and there was not much color on her lips. When Qin Ruoying saw her sick appearance, her eyes could not help but turn red. Aunt Zhang drank a mouthful of water. Just as she was about to lie down and continue to rest, she saw the family of 3 standing not far away. She blinked, thinking that she had seen wrongly. Seeing that, Qin Ruoying quickly went forward and sat by Aunt Zhang's bed, holding her hand tightly. Looking at Aunt Zhang who was half lying in front of her, Qin Ruoying could not help but feel a lump in her throat. She could not help but cry immediately. She had not seen Aunt Zhang for many years. Unexpectedly, the old lady was already lying on the bed when they met again. How could Qin Ruoying not feel sad? Aunt Zhang had watched her grow up, and she had also watched Aunt Zhang grow old day by day. "Aunt, what's wrong with you? Why are you so sick?" "Silly child, I'm fine. My body is fine. Look at you, why are you crying? Isn't it inauspicious? Come, wipe your tears." Aunt Zhang smiled as she pulled a tissue from the bedside and handed it to Qin Ruoying. After Qin Ruoying wiped her tears, Aunt Zhang patted the back of her hand, indicating that she did not need to worry. Then, Aunt Zhang turned her head to look at the little girl in Chen Shi's arms. "Good granddaughter, come to grandma." The little girl was sitting in Chen Shi's arms, pouting as she looked at Aunt Zhang who was lying on the bed. Chapter 209. Although the smell of disinfectant was strong in the corridor of the hospital, there seemed to be an irrepressible stench in the air. The corridor was bustling with activity. Although there were many people, everyone was trying their best not to make too much noise. After all, it was an unlucky place. Sadness and sadness were the main theme here. The back of the bed could be raised. Instead of saying that Aunt Zhang was lying on the bed, it was better to say that she was leaning on the bed. When the little girl saw her grandmother's sickly appearance, she immediately lay in her grandmother's arms and cried out sadly. When Aunt Zhang saw this, she immediately patted her little head and comforted her very kindly. "Oh, my good granddaughter, what's wrong? Who bullied you? Tell grandma, grandma will stand up for you." Hearing this, the little girl's eyes turned red. She said with an aggrieved face, "Grandma, don't be sick. I don't want you to be sick." All right, grandma is not sick." Aunt Zhang took out a tissue and wiped the little girl's face. Then, she pinched her little face and comforted her. "Good girl, don't cry. Look at how many people are here, and you're still crying here. Don't you feel embarrassed?" The little girl turned her head and glanced at both sides of the corridor. When she saw that many people were looking at them, she immediately sniffled a little embarrassedly. Then, she threw herself into Aunt Zhang's arms and hugged her tightly. Just when the little girl and Aunt Zhang were being lovey-dovey, Chen Shi came to Xia Pinglin's side. He patted Xia Pinglin's shoulder and walked to the side. When Xia Pinglin came over, Chen Shi asked directly, "What did the doctor say?" "They did a Doppler examination in the morning. The report is just out. I've asked the doctor. The doctor said that acute cerebral blood supply is very common in the elderly. It's not a big problem. She just needs to pay more attention to her diet and rest. Is that so?" Chen Shi pondered for a while. Then, he looked at Aunt Zhang's bed and asked rather unhappily, "Are there no more beds in the hospital? Why did they arrange for her to be in the corridor?" There were several types of beds in the hospital. The most common ones were a 7-person room, a 3-person room, a double room, and a single room. As for the Isles, usually only patients with limited beds or financial difficulties would stay there. In the past 2 years, the housing prices in Chengdu had risen particularly fast. The prices in the Third Ring Road had exceeded 10,000, and the prices in the South Gate were as high as 20 to 30,000. However, Chen Shi had not given Xia Pinglin 1 million, but 1,800,000. The money was more than enough to buy a house with 3 bedrooms and 1 living room. Moreover, Xia Pinglin and his wife had some savings. If Xia Pinglin really wanted to mistreat his own mother, Chen Shi could only apologize to him. However, the real situation was not what Chen Shi imagined. When Xia Pinglin heard Chen Shi's question, he couldn't help but look at his expression. After realizing that Chen Shi seemed to be a little angry, Xia Pinglin quickly explained, "It's not that there aren't enough beds, and it's not that I don't want to spend money. It's just that my mom doesn't agree. Originally, I arranged a double room for her, but after my mom woke up, she felt that there was nothing wrong with her. She was afraid that it would be a waste, so she insisted that the nurse move her to the Isles. She wouldn't listen no matter how I persuaded her. Since she didn't want to, I had no choice but to let it be." Speaking of this, Xia Pinglin was also quite depressed. In fact, the hospital bed fee was not too expensive. There were clearly beds in the ward, but as a son, he let his mother stay in the Isles. Therefore, he had been looked down upon by many people these 2 days. "Then it seems that I've misunderstood you. I'm sorry." It's okay. "Brother Chen, you're treating me like an outsider." Xia Pinglin was still the same as before, not good with words. Therefore, Chen Shi changed the topic and asked about their recent situation. Their child was still young. Once Aunt Zhang fell ill, there was no one to take care of the child. A place like the hospital was obviously not suitable for children to stay for long, so Kai Shuqin was now at home taking care of the child all day. The two of them chatted for a while. Seeing that Aunt Zhang had coaxed the little guy, Chen Shi went to Aunt Zhang's bedside and took her pulse. Aunt Zhang's current situation was indeed similar to what the doctor said. There was no major problem, but her pulse was weak, and her qi and blood were insufficient. She would be fine after a good rest, a regular diet, and more exercise. However, it was precisely because of this that Chen Shi felt a little strange. Could it be that his energy cultivation pill was really a fake and inferior product? How long had it been since Aunt Zhang returned to Chengdu? How did this happen? Thinking of this, Chen Shi could not help but ask doubtfully, once acute cerebral blood supply deficiency occurs, it will come very suddenly. However, there should be some signs before the onset, such as blurred vision, tinnitus, nausea, cold sweat, and weakness in the limbs. You didn't feel any of these before? Hearing this, Aunt Zhang shook her head and smiled. No, I'm old. It's normal for some problems to suddenly appear. Previously, we were celebrating the new year at our hometown. I guess it's because we haven't been back for a long time. After I got there, I felt a little unacclimatized and couldn't sleep well. Other than sleep, there were no other problems. The symptoms you mentioned just now, there were none at all. There were no signs? Hearing Aunt Zhang's words, Chen Shi was instantly puzzled. It sounded like everything was normal. Thus, after pondering for a while, he continued to ask, "Where is your hometown?" Rain City. Although Rain City was a prefecture-level city, due to geographical reasons, its economic development was very slow. It could not even compare to some of the coastal towns. However, such a small and unremarkable city had once been glorious. During the Republic of China, Rain City was the provincial capital of Xikang Province. Its status was comparable to the current Chengdu. In 1955, the first session of the National People's Congress officially proposed to abolish Xikang Province. Thus, Rain City lost its status as a provincial capital. This place was surrounded by mountains on all sides. The terrain was narrow and it was inconvenient to travel. After Xikang Province was abolished, Rain City's development was greatly affected. It was gradually reduced to an 18th-tier small city. Later on, Rain City finally walked into the eyes of the entire nation again. However, it was because of the 4.20 earthquake in 2013. Rain City? Xianxia thoughtfully repeated the name of this place. Suddenly, a question appeared in his mind. Could it be that there was something wrong with that place? Aunt Zhang was still lying on the hospital bed, so Xianxia did not ask much. The most important thing now was to let the old lady rest well and recover her body. Thus, after feeding Aunt Zhang a simplified version of the energy-enhancing pill, Xianxia went to Huaxi Gold Card Medical Center to apply for a gold card for her in case such a situation happened again. In this day and age, money could make the devil turn millstones, let alone a hospital. The Gold Card Medical Center was located in Huaxi Hospital's headquarters. Ordinary members were 58,000 and advanced members were 200,000. When they entered the hospital, they could enjoy concierge reception, personal care, 5-star hotel rooms, on-site services, and 24 hours of call. After all, Xianxia could not stay in Chengdu for a long period of time. Aunt Zhang was old, so it was better to be prepared for her advanced membership. Chapter 210. Insufficient blood supply to the brain was mostly due to cerebral arteriosclerosis. As people aged, their organ functions would deteriorate, leading to a decline in hematopoietic ability. In addition, the formation of microthrombosis would block the blood vessels and reduce the blood flow. As a result, the brain would have insufficient blood supply to the brain. According to statistics, 80% of people over the age of 80 had insufficient blood supply to the brain, 70% of people over the age of 60 would have some degree of insufficient blood supply to the brain. Since it was caused by the blockage of blood vessels and the decline in hematopoietic ability, the effect of the meridian unblocking pill was obviously much better than the energy pill. Therefore, Xianxia refined a meridian unblocking pill for Aunt Zhang overnight. After the old lady took it, her complexion improved significantly. Aunt Zhang had come from a hard life and wanted to save every needle and thread. Although she knew that Xianxia was rich now, she still insisted on not wasting money. After staying in the Gold Card Center for one night, she insisted on leaving the hospital and going home. When they went home, Xia Pinglin took a taxi alone and walked in front. The family of 3 and Aunt Zhang sat in another car. This finally gave Aunt Zhang a chance to lecture him. The ward in the Gold Card Center was obviously very high class. Staying for one night was similar to staying in a hotel. How wasteful was that? She was not that delicate. How was staying in the aisles shameful? She was not in good spirits yesterday, so when Xianxia forced her to be transferred to another ward, Aunt Zhang did not say anything. Now that she was in good spirits, she naturally lectured Xianxia. She lectured Xianxia until he could not raise his head. In the end, even the little girl could not stand it anymore. She jumped into Aunt Zhang's arms and said coquettishly, "Grandma, Papa cares about you. Don't scold Papa. Oh, Nian has grown up. You know how to speak up for Papa now." Looking at the little girl's cute appearance, Aunt Zhang could not help but pinch her cheeks. She finally stopped complaining about Xianxia. The so-called traveling was actually going from a place that one was tired of to a place that others were tired of. It was already the 6th day of the Chinese New Year. The traffic in Jinli and Wuhou Temple had decreased significantly. Although there were still many tourists, it was not enough for the traffic police to block the road. The little girl wanted to eat hot pot, but when she saw the long lines of hot pot restaurants along the way, she immediately pouted unhappily. Thus, Auntie Zhang bought the hot pot base from the supermarket and prepared to make a small hot pot for her at home. When the group returned to 262 Wuhou Temple Street, Kai Shuqin was sitting on the sofa watching TV. But this time, when she saw Xianxia and his family enter the door, Kai Shuqin's attitude changed drastically. Before Aunt Zhang could call her, Kai Shuqin stood up and warmly invited Chen Shi and his family to take a seat. Then, she excitedly ran to make 2 cups of tea for Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying. After making tea, Kai Shuqin didn't forget to peel an apple for the little girl. However, Kai Shuqin was very enthusiastic, but the little guy still remembered the grudge. After being ignored by Kai Shuqin last time, the little guy especially disliked this strange ant. Therefore, when the little guy saw Kai Shuqin about to hand the peeled apple to her, she suddenly turned her head, snorted twice, and climbed from Qin Ruoying's lap to Chen Shi's lap. Qin Ruoying was a little confused. After thanking Kai Shuqin very politely, she took the apple and prepared to feed the little guy. But at this time, the little guy was lying in Chen Shi's arms. No matter how she called, the little guy was unwilling to raise his head. Kai Shuqin could not find a way out of this situation due to his outburst of anger. After smiling at Chen Shi a little awkwardly, Kai Shuqin let Aunt Zhang take care of the child, and she quickly walked to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Chen Shi used 1.8 million to solve the conflict in Aunt Zhang's family, and also made Kai Shuqin completely change. After all, the little guy was not a stingy person. She also saw the changes in Kai Shuqin. As a result, during dinner, the little fellow finally stopped giving her attitude and sat obediently on the chair to gorge himself on the food. At the end of the spring festival, the family happily ate the homemade hot pot. That taste, it was simply unimaginable. After dinner, the family prepared to go out for a walk. Aunt Zhang's house was diagonally opposite the Wuho temple, so when they walked to the street, they saw the street was full of red lanterns, and the street was full of tourists. The family came to the entrance of Jinli to take a look. After seeing that there were many tourists inside, they dismissed the idea. Therefore, Qin Ruoying suggested that they go to the movies. And her suggestion was immediately seconded by the little guy. The little guy had never seen a movie before. And it was not only her, even Aunt Zhang had never seen a movie before. Of course, it was not that Aunt Zhang had never seen a movie before, but she saw an old theater in the past. The screen was much bigger than the current IMAX, and could accommodate thousands of people at a time. Aunt Zhang's impression of the cinema was still in the 1980s, so she did not really want to go. Seeing this, the little guy was immediately unhappy. He stomped his feet and insisted that his grandmother go with him. Aunt Zhang could not persuade him, so she had no choice but to agree. Therefore, Kai Shuqin went home to take care of the child, while Aunt Zhang and Xie Pinglin accompanied Chen Shi's family to the movies. When buying tickets, Chen Shi actually wanted to buy tickets to the Red Sea operation. However, the little guy was the main character today, so he had no choice but to buy Bonnie Bears. The 4 adults accompanied the child to watch an animated movie. After all, it was an animated movie for young children. Chen Shi originally accompanied the little guy into the theater with the mentality of completing a mission. However, after watching it, he felt that the movie was much better than he had imagined. Apart from the joy and humor, it was also filled with a strong sense of fatherly love and warmth. When the little guy saw the part where Baldi Chang missed his father, he actually cried. Perhaps it was because he thought of the time when he did not have his parents by his side. The little guy cried so hard that he could not stop no matter how Qin Ruoying comforted him. In the end, it was Chen Shi who comforted him that the little guy finally stopped crying. Now that she was crying, it was worth the price of the ticket. It was already very tiring to be highly focused while watching a movie. Moreover, the little guy had cried for a while just now, so he fell into a deep sleep as soon as he left the cinema. The cinema was not far from home, so they did not take a taxi on the way back. As they walked, Chen Shi started chatting with Auntie Zhang. Aunt Zhang, I heard that Rain City is also a tourist attraction. Look, it's rare for Ninian to come here. Why don't we go to your hometown and have some fun? Chen Shi was still brooding about the energy cultivation pill's failure, so he deliberately led the conversation to that place. However, when Aunt Zhang heard his words, she waved her hand and laughed. Rain City is a city. My hometown is dozens of kilometers away from Rain City. It's in a small town in the county. What's so fun about a remote place like that? The countryside is even better. Look, Nian has been in big cities like Zhonghai and Shangjing since she was young. Let's take her to see the countryside. Maybe it will be good for her future growth. Aunt Zhang had always attached great importance to Nian's education, so Qianxi's words immediately touched her heart. Wasn't Mango TV's transfiguration meter very popular? Let the children in the city live in the countryside for a period of time, let them experience the hardships of life and learn to be grateful. Of course, the values of the program itself were distorted and lacked respect for people. The reason why the children fell was not because the family was rich, but because of improper education. Therefore, the education of the children was very important to the parents. Chapter 2:11. It was only around 10 o'clock, but the streets were already quiet. The little girl was sleeping soundly on Qianxi's shoulder. She didn't know that her dearest grandma and dad were now discussing throwing her to the countryside to experience life. The city was developing faster and faster. From the 1990s to the millennium, from pagers to mobile phones, and then to Nokia and Motorola. 10 years after 10 years, Nokia went bankrupt, and Motorola was half dead. From the envied Crown and Santala, to the streets full of Land Rovers and Cayenne. Wuxia went through waves of rapid development. Even credit cards weren't popularized yet, and it directly entered the mobile payment era. Primary school students used their mobile phones to buy crepes, and aunties used QR codes to collect money. The mainland people couldn't afford tea eggs, and it once became a big joke on the internet. Now, no one mentioned it. Yuan would be recovered sooner or later. In another 10 years, who would dare to mention independence in Hong Kong and Tibet? Wuxia's development speed made the Western countries stunned. It also made them realize that the lion from the east had finally woken up. However, although the economic development speed was fast, some things obviously didn't follow the pace of economic development. Instead, they became slightly worse than before. In the past, everyone called farmers uncle. Later on, people began to call the farmers brothers. Later, the word farmer seemed to become a curse word. Now, the so-called city people, who didn't have ancestors who were farmers. To use a word from the Spring Festival Gala to describe it, that was, manic. People nowadays were too manic. A program like Transfiguration shouldn't have appeared. For the children in the city, this program undoubtedly gave them a good education opportunity. It let them see the hardships of ordinary people, so that they learned to respect and cherish their current life. However, for the children and parents in the countryside, this program brought them endless harm and doubts about themselves and society. The kind and simple rural children, after seeing the bright lights of the big city, would they ask one question: why? Why did the second-generation rich not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives? Why did the second-generation poor not be able to walk out of the mountains for the rest of their lives? Education was never a matter of instant results. It was a long and drawn-out battle. From the moment Qianxi returned to Nian's side, he was already prepared for this battle. He wanted to teach Nian a lesson. What is a human? The nature of heaven and earth was the most precious. This rune was in the shape of an elephant's arm and shin. Mortals all follow the example of humans. Man means an upright animal that knows how to bow and humbly. As the saying goes, it takes 10 years for a tree to grow, but 100 years for a man to grow. There was no perfect person in this world. Qianxi only wanted to do his best to train his daughter into a person that he approved of in his heart. Early the next morning, the whole family set off amidst the little fellow's cheers. In the little guy's understanding, rural areas were no different from tourist attractions. Therefore, when she heard that Qianxi was going to take her to Aunt Zhang's hometown, the little girl was very excited. Qianxi rented a commercial car, and then the family of 7 went straight to Rain City. Aunt Zhang's hometown was in Xianxia County under the jurisdiction of Rain City. They first took the highway to Xianxia County, then took the 108 National Highway to the countryside, and after more than 10 kilometers of winding mountain roads, they finally arrived at the production team in Aunt Zhang's hometown. Of course, the name of the production team had been abolished, and now it was called the Villager Group. The little guy had always been in first-tier cities like Shangjing and Zhonghai, and all she saw were reinforced concrete jungles. Suddenly coming to such a picturesque place really gave her a very novel experience. Many people didn't know that there were actually 3 Silk Roads. In addition to the mainland passage from Chang'an to Rome opened by Zhang Qian in the Han Dynasty, the other was the Southwest Silk Road. The predecessor of the Southwest Silk Road was the T-Horse Ancient Road. It went from Sichuan to Jianghu, through Myanmar to India, and finally to Iran. The 108 National Highway started from Shangjing and ended at Jianghu's Spring City. It was 3,356 kilometers long. After this highway entered Sichuan, it basically followed the route of the T-Horse Ancient Road. The car zigzagged along the highway. Because it was a winding mountain road, the speed was very slow. On one side of the road was a cliff, and on the other side was a cliff. Below the cliff was a surging river. When had the little guy ever seen such a spectacular scene? Therefore, she was very excited to lie on the car window, looking at the river under the cliff and constantly exclaiming. Most of the rural areas in the north were concentrated, while the rural areas in the south liked to live separately. Therefore, along the road, from time to time, she would see a few lonely small courtyards standing on the edge of the cliff. When the Beijing-Kunming Expressway was not built, the 108 National Highway was the only way to go from Sichuan to Jianghu. Therefore, many villagers opened restaurants and small stores along the road to earn some extra money from long-distance outsiders to subsidize their families. However, with the completion of the Beijing-Kunming Expressway, the 108 National Highway went into decline. After all, with the expressway, who would still be circling and bumping on the old road? This also led to the economic development of this route almost stagnating, and even regressing. Most of the small houses seen along the road were built more than 10 years ago. In recent years, the real estate speculation was so fierce that the people were also greatly affected. Now, anyone who had a little money would go to the county to buy a house and move the family into the county, instead of choosing to build their own house and continue to stay in this place. This was also the result of the development of the times. Aunt Zhang's hometown was more poor and backward than Chunxi imagined. This place was called Tongjiegu. It was a small village that was 5 kilometers away from the nearest town. There were a few 2-story bungalows scattered on both sides of the road. The first floor of the bungalow was a restaurant, but now the door was closed. Even the signboard with the words, "Dining and Accommodation," had become tattered and uncared for. Other than these few houses, most of the other houses were bungalows. Some were even black wooden houses. At first glance, it was obvious that they were old buildings from the 50s and 60s. There was no school in the village. If the children wanted to go to school, they had to spend a yuan every morning to take a van to the town's middle school. However, who did not have a few rich and powerful relatives now? When the children reached the age of middle school, the villagers would send the children to the county or the relative's house in the town. Therefore, there were basically no children in their teens in this place. Instead, there were many children about the same age as Nian. The children were in groups of 3 to 5. As soon as they saw the GL8 from Chengdu, they swarmed over. After Qin Ruoying took the little girl out of the car, several children immediately surrounded her and chattered in a dialect that she did not understand at all. This scene was completely out of the little girl's expectations and immediately made her a little scared. The little girl timidly hid most of her body behind Qin Ruoying, only revealing half of her head to look at the peers in front of her. She was afraid of others, but the children in front of her were not afraid of her. Instead, they smiled and made faces at her. Aunt Zhang noticed the little girl's strange behavior and laughed like she was chasing ducks. She waved to the children and said, "Go, go, go, go play somewhere else." These children seemed to know Auntie Zhang, so after chattering for a while, they ran away like a swarm of bees. Once the children had run far away, the little one cowered and crawled out from behind Qin Ruoying. She looked at the bungalows around her and then looked at the shabby bungalow not far away. This small village was built on the national highway. On one side was a mountain, and on the other was a river valley. Because there were few cars passing by now, the village was particularly quiet. The little girl looked at this strange place blankly and suddenly felt a sense of oppression in her heart. Chapter 2:12. The sunshine of the 7th day of the Chinese New Year shone on her head, but the little fellow's heart was cold. Was this the countryside? Why was it different from what she had imagined? National Highway 108 went straight through the village, and all kinds of old buildings were not arranged neatly on both sides of the street. The arrival of Qianxi's family caused a lot of noise here, so that many villagers leaned out to observe them silently. The village was not big, and one could see the end of it at a glance. On the left side of the road was a mountain, and a muddy road went straight up the mountain. On the right side was the valley and large fields. The wheat fields in winter were not as beautiful as in autumn. The withered yellow straw was scattered on the field in a disorderly manner, and it was a scene of withering. The car had been booked by Qianxi, but there were no hotels nearby, so the driver could only drive back to the county to stay. Of course, his expenses for these few days were naturally all on Qianxi's head. The little fellow wanted to leave with the driver, but was stopped by Qin Ruoying. When she saw the GL8 turn around and drive away, the little fellow suddenly curled her lips. Looking at that pitiful little appearance, it seemed that she was about to cry. Qin Ruoying quickly hugged her in her arms and comforted her. "Nian Nian, be good. This is Grandma's home, don't be afraid. We'll stay here with Grandma for a few days and then go back. Don't you want to accompany Grandma?" Hearing this, the little fellow said with grievance, "I want to be with Grandma, but I don't like it here. I don't like it here. Mama, I want to go home." Children were always a little afraid of strangers. And this was a new environment that the little fellow had never been to, so even if Qianxi, Qin Ruoying, and Grandma were all by her side, the little fellow still felt very uncomfortable and depressed. The little fellow was upset. Her reaction also attracted Qianxi's attention. When Qianxi saw her pitiful appearance, he immediately came to Qin Ruoying's side. After taking the little fellow from Qin Ruoying's arms, Qianxi said to her with a smile, "Nian Nian, are you scared?" However, when the little girl heard Qianxi's question, she immediately turned her little head and muttered unhappily, "Papa, I want to go home. I don't want to be here. It's not fun here." Seeing this, Qianxi immediately smiled and asked, "Why isn't it fun here?" "It's just not fun. I don't like it here." "Nian Nian, you're wrong. This place is actually very fun, not fun at all." Before Qianxi could finish his words, the little fellow had already interrupted him. From the looks of it, she seemed to be angry. Qianxi reached out to pinch her little face, but she swatted his hand away. This little thing was still at odds with her father. When it came to coaxing his daughter, Qianxi was now very handy and had many tricks up his sleeve. Therefore, when he saw that the little fellow seemed to be conflicted, he decisively stopped the topic and asked in a negotiating tone, "Nian Nian, how about this? Let's stay here for one night. If you really don't like it here, Papa will take you home tomorrow, okay?" After hearing Qianxi's words, the little fellow rested her head on his shoulder and thought for a moment. Then, she reluctantly hummed and reluctantly agreed, "Then we'll stay for one night. Just one night. Pinky promise." After that, the little fellow stretched out her little finger and motioned for Qianxi to pinky promise with her. "Okay, Papa will pinky promise with you. I promise I'll keep my word." The father and daughter reached an agreement, and the little fellow finally stopped throwing a tantrum. Then, under the guidance of Aunt Zhang's family, they walked down the path to the valley. After walking for about 200 meters, Qianxi's family finally saw Aunt Zhang's old house. Aunt Zhang's old house, it was indeed very old. The living environment in the Kangju district was already very poor, but compared to Aunt Zhang's old house, it was really the difference between a villa hotel and a small train station hotel. This house was built by Aunt Zhang's father's generation. The main materials were wood and yellow mud. Because it was exposed to wind and rain all year round, it caused the wood to mold and turn black. Therefore, when looking from the outside, the whole house was somewhat dark. The house was surrounded by fields, and a few hundred meters down was the river. Not far away, there was a bamboo forest with luxuriant foliage, so much so that it looked quite gloomy in broad daylight. In the morning, Chengdu was still bustling, but after 3 hours, they came to such a quiet and backward little village. Not to mention the little fellow, even Qin Ruoying was somewhat not used to it. Although the little fellow had already agreed to stay here for one night, when they were close to the house, she was still somewhat unwilling. She kept twisting her body and shouting for Qianxi to put her down. Qianxi did not say much to her. He carried her directly into the house. At this time, it was right to cut the Gordian knot. After letting her get used to it, naturally, she would not be as resistant as she was now. In reality, Qianxi really thought that this place was not bad. The mountains were clear and the water was clear, and the land was full of outstanding people. Although the house was a little simple, it was good in terms of peace and comfort. Moreover, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth here was very rich. After staying in this place for a long time, even breathing could make one feel refreshed and very comfortable. A few days ago, Aunt Zhang suddenly fell ill, so Xie Pinglin hurriedly brought the old lady back to Chengdu. They had only been away for a few days, so there was obviously the smell of smoke in this house. This house was actually very big. Looking at it now, it was 4 bedrooms, 1 living room, and 1 kitchen. Overall, it was very good. The only bad thing was that there was no bathroom, so it was very inconvenient to take a bath. Moreover, the bathroom was a latrine, the kind that was extremely smelly. Aunt Zhang was already prepared for this. The bungalow by the street used to be a hotel. There were toilets and bathrooms on the first floor. Aunt Zhang had already informed the owner of the house, so Qianxi's family could go there if they wanted to wash up. After Qianxi carried the little girl around the house, the little girl gradually relaxed, so she turned her little head and began to look around. There was a TV in the living room at home, but it was a small color TV from the 80s and 90s. There was no wall paint in the old house. After a layer of lime was casually applied, newspapers were pasted on the wall as wallpaper. Most of these newspapers were from 30 to 40 years ago, so many of them were already yellowed and rolled up. There was also a portrait of Grandpa Mao on the wall. It was a common poster of that era, so it looked quite old. Although the house was old, it was very clean. Although furniture like the wardrobe and table were old, because of its age, it had a different kind of charm. Perhaps it was because the house and furniture were made of wood that there was always an indescribable wood fragrance in the house. It was very comfortable to smell. Overall, this house was a little too simple on the outside, but the other places were really not as bad as the little girl had imagined. After roughly understanding the internal structure of the house, the little girl could finally accept the fact that she would be staying here for a night. Therefore, she came to the living room under Aunt Zhang's call, then sat on a small stool and ate oranges. Chapter 213. Auntie Zhang's house did not have a TV on demand, nor did it have so many strange toys, so the little fellow lost interest after sitting for a while. She began to wander around. The little fellow wanted to go out and play, but when she stood at the threshold and looked at the large field outside the house, she curled her lips and stopped. She didn't dare to go. In Trump's words, it was her first time here, and she hadn't even warmed up the territory yet. Of course, she didn't dare to go anywhere. The little fellow put one hand on the door and the other hand flipped the corner of her clothes. That pitiful little look was somewhat like a resentful wife waiting for her husband to return from work. Qin Ruoying was helping Kai Shuqin clean up the kitchen. When she came out and saw the little fellow's back, she immediately went to Chen Shi and gently touched him. Chen Shi certainly understood what she meant, so after a slight smile, he suddenly stepped forward and hugged the little fellow from behind. The little fellow exclaimed. When she turned around and saw that it was her father, she couldn't help but pout. Before she could speak, Chen Shi asked with a smile, "Nian Nian, Mom and Grandma are tidying up the house. Dad will take you out to play, okay?" Hearing this, the little fellow turned her head and glanced at the surrounding environment, then muttered in a low voice, "It's not fun here. Why is it not fun?" "It's just that you're still young and haven't seen those fun things. Let's go, Dad will take you to see it." After that, Chen Shi carried the little fellow and walked directly to the bamboo forest. It was noon now, and the sun was very bright, but once they entered the bamboo forest, there was still a chill in the air. This bamboo forest was quite old, and the branches and leaves were very lush, so much so that it blocked a lot of the sun, looking a little gloomy. Cold and wet places had always been unfavored by mammals, so the little fellow's first reaction was to want to leave. Chen Shi sensed her fear, so he patted her back, and then released a strand of Zhen Yuan. Under the true essence, the little fellow immediately had a warm and comfortable feeling, which also gradually calmed her slightly trembling little body. The bamboo forest was not very big, and one could see the end of it at a glance. After Chen Shi brought her into the bamboo forest, he placed the little fellow on the ground. Because very few people would come here, the fallen bamboo leaves had piled up layer after layer. Stepping on them would immediately make a rustling sound. Since the beginning of the new year, the sun had been shining continuously for several days. Therefore, when the little fellow stepped on the ground, the pile of withered leaves began to creak. This made her feel a little interested, so she stepped on it and started jumping around. Seeing that she was no longer afraid, Chen Shi led her to a mother bamboo, then squatted down and said to her, "Nian Nian, Daddy will teach you how to dig winter bamboo shoots, okay?" "Winter bamboo shoots? What is it?" "This is it." As Chen Shi talked to her, he plucked a tree branch and started digging on the ground. He didn't even have to dig a few times before he dug out a yellowish object from the ground. This thing had a sharp head and a big butt. In terms of shape, it was somewhat similar to baogu. It was wrapped in a thick shell. This was winter bamboo shoots. Winter bamboo shoots were also a characteristic product of the south. They were the most abundant in January and February every year. They had the reputation of golden clothes and white jade, the best among vegetables. Because they had not been unearthed yet, the winter bamboo shoots were tender and white like jade. It was the most common side dish at banquets when cooked with meat. For example, the famous Wuxia bamboo shoots stir-fried with meat. Digging winter bamboo shoots was actually very simple. Tender bamboo would not grow bamboo shoots. The darker the color, the older the age. Generally, one should not choose too tender or too old. After selecting the bamboo, you can observe it from below. Whenever you see a slight bump in the ground or a loose crack, you can use your feet to lightly step on it. If the ground is not firm and has a soft feeling, it is a sign that there are bamboo shoots. Chen Shi briefly explained to the little fellow, and then handed the tree branch to her. Digging bamboo shoots required a small hoe, but Chen Shi could not find a hoe for the time being, so he could only secretly use his Zhenqi to loosen the soil for her when the little fellow was digging. Under the guidance of Chen Shi, the little fellow chose a new bamboo and began to dig below. After digging a few times, she felt that the tree branch seemed to have touched something. Her eyes could not help but brighten, and she dug harder. Sure enough, when she dug around the hard thing and dug out the surrounding soil, a winter bamboo shoot buried in the soil finally appeared in front of her eyes. "Papa! I dug it out! I dug it out!" After the little fellow pulled the winter bamboo shoot out of the ground, she did not care about the mud on it, grabbed the winter bamboo shoot and waved it excitedly. But at this moment, an accident suddenly occurred. The little fellow held the winter bamboo shoot in front of Qianxi as if she was presenting a treasure. Just as Qianxi took the winter bamboo shoot with a smile and was about to put it away to make bamboo shoots stir-fried with meat for the little fellow later, the little fellow's eyes suddenly drifted to the low slope in front of the bamboo forest. Following which, she was so frightened that her hands started to tremble. Suddenly, she started to cry loudly. Qianxi hurriedly hugged the little fellow into his arms and comforted her, and then looked back with a livid face. There was a person behind them. Qianxi knew about the arrival of this person, but he thought that the other party was a villager here, so he did not pay attention to him. But he did not expect that after seeing this person, the little fellow was so scared that she burst into tears, a mistake. Because there was no divine sense, Qianxi could only perceive with his 5 senses. After hearing it, he did not look back. When he turned around, he finally understood why this person was able to scare the little girl to tears. It was a woman. An old woman whose specific age could not be determined. Her face was haggard, and her hair was silver. She looked like an ordinary old lady. But what was truly shocking was her attire. This old woman was wearing a brightly colored old-fashioned wedding robe. It was bright red, as dazzling as a young girl who was about to get married. The withered old woman was wearing a bright red wedding robe, and there was an indescribable strangeness about her. Qianxi's expression turned cold. After picking up the little fellow from the ground, he gently pressed the little fellow's head into his arms. Then, Qianxi's figure suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already standing in front of the old woman. Qianxi did not stand on ceremony. With one hand holding the crying little fellow, he directly slapped the old woman's head with the other. However, after Qianxi's slap, the old woman did not dodge, as if she did not see it. Her gaze was dull, and she was probably either retarded or stupid. Qianxi did not want to hurt her, but wanted to see her condition. As expected, she was just an ordinary old woman. The only difference was that she had lost her young soul. The little fellow's cries were very loud, and the moment she started crying, it had already alarmed Aunt Zhang in the room. Aunt Zhang quickly ran out of the room. When she came to the courtyard and looked at the bamboo forest, Qianxi had already returned to his original spot with the little fellow, and looked at the old woman from afar. Chapter 214. Under Auntie Zhang's loud call, Qianxi immediately carried the crying little girl back to Auntie Zhang's courtyard. Auntie Zhang first glared at Qianxi rather angrily, then angrily took the little girl from Qianxi's arms. "Look at you, why did you bring her around for no reason? Even the sun can't shine in that old forest. I grew up here and felt that that place was a bit gloomy, so I wouldn't go near there for no reason. It's not like you don't know that children are timid. Are you really not afraid of scaring her?" Auntie Zhang grumbled while carefully comforting the little girl. This time, the little girl was really frightened by the old woman in the wedding robe. Lying in Auntie Zhang's arms, she cried bitterly and couldn't stop no matter how she comforted her. When Qin Ruoying and Kai Shuqin heard the commotion, they also hurriedly came out of the house. Looking at their somewhat resentful gazes, Qianxi could only helplessly shake his head. It was indeed his mistake. If he had turned back to look at the old woman earlier, he wouldn't have let the old woman appear in the little girl's line of sight at all. The little girl was frightened and couldn't stop crying for a long time. Seeing this, Qianxi asked Auntie Zhang to hand the little girl to him, then carried the little girl back and forth in the courtyard. "Nian Nian, it's okay, that strange person has already run away. Daddy is still here, don't be afraid." It seemed that his comforting words worked. After about 2 minutes, the little girl who was still wailing just now actually fell asleep on his shoulder just like that. This made Auntie Zhang finally breathe a sigh of relief. She hurriedly shouted at Qianxi to put the little girl on the bed, ready to let her have a good sleep first. In fact, the little girl didn't fall asleep on her own. In order to prevent this from leaving a psychological scar on her, Xianxia had no choice but to cast a mind-loss spell on the little girl. This spell could make the little girl temporarily unconscious. When she woke up, she would forget what had just happened. Xianxia carried the little girl back to the bed, covered her with a blanket, then turned and left the room. In the living room, Aunt Zhang was still brooding over the fact that Xianxia ran around with the child, but when Xianxia told her about the old woman in the wedding gown, Aunt Zhang immediately frowned and muttered thoughtfully, "Old woman in the wedding gown? Could it be that you have met Guifan?" Guifan? Sigh, no wonder Nian was so scared. Looking at Xianxia's puzzled expression, Auntie Zhang smiled helplessly, and then explained, "Guifan is about the same age as me. When I married and moved to Rong City, she had just gotten married. I haven't seen her for almost 30 years. When I came back for the new year this year, I heard that Guifan had gone crazy. She's been wearing her wedding dress all day long and wandering around the village, like a ghost. It's so scary, crazy. Why? I heard them say that last year, her son suddenly fell into the river and drowned. Guifan couldn't figure it out and drove herself crazy. Last year? Yes, I heard it was last summer." After hearing Aunt Zhang's words, Xianxia frowned and didn't say anything for a long time. The old woman in the wedding gown's real name was Zhao Guifan. Xianxia had close contact with her before, so he knew that she wasn't simply crazy. She clearly looked like she had lost her yang soul. The yang soul was different from the yin soul. Losing the yin soul would only cause the body to be weak and sickly, but if the yang soul was lost, it would cause the yin energy to control the yang. It would cause the human heart to be dark and weak, and the 4 major diseases would come to an end. The dark heart mentioned above referred to people becoming stupid and foolish, just like what Zhao Guifan had just shown. Losing the yang soul meant that one wouldn't live long. Zhao Guifan was only a few years younger than Aunt Zhang. If she was born without a soul, and it was the extremely important yang soul, then she obviously wouldn't have been able to live to such an old age. Without a doubt, Zhao Guifan's sudden madness was definitely not because of her son's death, but because she had lost her yang soul. A perfectly fine person wouldn't lose her yang soul for no reason. Then, he thought of Aunt Zhang's sudden and inexplicable faint a few days ago. Xianxia's expression immediately darkened. This place was really a little strange. The absent-minded curse wasn't as gentle as the meditation curse. This also caused the little fellow to sleep for a long time. When she woke up, she would have to go tomorrow. The countryside wasn't like the city. There were no street lights or billboards here. As soon as the sun set, the entire village would be completely swallowed by the curtain of night. Why did the supernatural phenomenon in the countryside continue? Wasn't it because there were too few entertainment activities in the past? At night, everyone would either wash up and go to sleep, or close the door to make little people to play. It was indeed much better than before. Every household had a TV, and everyone had a 4G phone, so after dark, everyone could watch TV and play with their phones before going to sleep. Perhaps it was because they had returned to the countryside. Aunt Zhang's family rested very early. However, at 9:30 p.m., they all washed up and went to sleep. After the lights in the room were turned off, the outside of the house was suddenly pitch black, and one couldn't even see their fingers. It wasn't spring yet, when everything was recovering. Without the chirping of birds and insects, it was particularly quiet outside the house. Lying on the bed, if one closed their eyes and listened carefully, they could even vaguely hear the sound of flowing water below the valley. Qin Ruoying sat cross-legged on the bed and silently cultivated, while Xianxia kept looking in the direction of the window. Suddenly, Xianxia sat up from the bed. His movement also alarmed Qin Ruoying. Qin Ruoying was about to speak, but Xianxia had already gently touched the back of her hand, and then whispered, "This place is strange. It shouldn't be a coincidence that Aunt Zhang fell ill before. I'll go out and have a look. I'll be back in a while." Okay. Then, Xianxia got up and quietly left the room. After setting up a restriction to surround the house, Xianxia flew directly into the sky and carefully looked at the village in front of him from a high place. The spiritual aura was still recovering, and the spiritual aura of heaven and earth here had become very rich. But other than that, there didn't seem to be anything strange. Xianxia carefully observed every building in the village, trying to find out what was wrong with it. But at this moment, Xianxia suddenly found that there seemed to be a figure moving on the path up the mountain. There were only two main roads in the village, one going up the mountain and the other going down the river. The moonlight tonight was very weak. Although it wasn't 10 o'clock in the evening, the road was already dark and he couldn't see anything at all. The person walked on the path without a flashlight or a lantern. He just moved forward in the dark, as if he wasn't afraid that he would fall down. If it weren't for Xianxia's eyesight that was far better than ordinary people's, he probably wouldn't have been able to find this sneaky person. So, he held his breath and flew above the person's head, wanting to see what this person wanted to do sneaking up the mountain in the middle of the night instead of sleeping. However, when Xianxia got closer, he suddenly found that. Chapter 2:15. People who had never been to the countryside might not be able to understand that feeling. That kind of darkness was just like what Qian Zhongshu described in the siege. The night was so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. In this kind of night, even ghosts would have to touch their noses and turn around. A cat would hate itself for not being able to use its mustache as an insect's feeler. In the late winter night, the mountain wind whistled. The withered grass and bare branches made a strange creaking sound. The surroundings were pitch black and it was almost impossible to see anything clearly. The tree branches were constantly swaying in the mountain wind. Under the faint moonlight, the shadows of the trees on the mountain walls were like ghosts baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, wailing and howling as they demanded the lives of passers-by. Zhao Guifan, this crazy woman, was wearing a wedding robe and wandering on the mountain road in the middle of the night. If someone were to pass by and shine a flashlight on her body, not to mention the little guy, even a strong-willed adult would be scared to the point of insanity by Zhao Guifan. Xianxia carefully observed the surroundings, but there were no traces of spiritual energy fluctuations in the surroundings. This meant that Zhao Guifan wasn't being cast by someone, but she wandered here in the middle of the night for no reason. A crazy person's brain circuit really couldn't be understood with common sense. Xianxia was very interested in Zhao Guifan's situation, so he quietly floated in the air. He wanted to see where Zhao Guifan was not sleeping in the middle of the night and where she was going. There was an abandoned coal mine on the mountain next to Tongjiegu. The winding mud road up the mountain was built by the coal mine owner a few years ago for mining. It was big enough for a large truck to drive normally. The coal mine had been abandoned for many years, and the mud road had been eroded out of shape by the wind and rain. It was very difficult to walk on. Fortunately, it hadn't rained these few days. Otherwise, not to mention Zhao Guifan, this crazy woman, even normal villagers would have fallen countless times on the mountain. Zhao Guifan's steps were very slow, so she also walked very steadily. Like a snail, she slowly moved up the mountain along the mud road. Fortunately, the person watching her was Xianxia. If it was someone else, they probably wouldn't have been able to stand the boring wait and would have directly returned to the house to sleep. Zhao Guifan left at 10 in the evening and walked for nearly 4 hours. At around 2 in the morning, she finally arrived at the abandoned coal mine on the mountain. This was a small coal mine. It was different from the underground coal mine shown in the blind shaft. There was no elevator here. Instead, a hole was drilled into the mountain wall. Then, one would follow the hole and push forward. This was the so-called adit mine. Compared to the development of inclined wells and vertical wells, adit development was the simplest in terms of technology, the cheapest in terms of economy, and also the safest development method. However, this mining method was only suitable for mountainous areas, so it was usually only found in small coal mines in the southwest. The passageway of the mine was a circular arch. It was dark inside the cave, and the weak moonlight couldn't shine in at all. No one knew what Zhao Guifan was thinking. After arriving at the mine, she actually swaggered directly into the mine. It was true that the reckless were afraid of the reckless, and the reckless were afraid of the reckless. Wasn't this crazy woman the one who didn't care about her life? Not to mention that it was still early in the morning, even if it was noon, when the sun was at its brightest, not many people would dare to enter this abandoned mine. Zhao Guifan had already gone crazy. A lunatic who didn't sleep in the middle of the night and went up the mountain in the dark into this abandoned mine. Thinking about it, it was also a very strange thing. She made up his mind today to get to the bottom of this matter, so after seeing Zhao Guifan enter the cave, he also flew into the dark cave entrance. As soon as they entered the cave, the surrounding temperature suddenly dropped several degrees. There was no light in the cave at all. As soon as Zhao Guifan entered the cave, her figure completely disappeared in the darkness. She snapped his fingers, and a fluorescent green light ball flew out from his fingertips. The light ball flew to Zhao Guifan's head, illuminating the road ahead for her. In this regard, Zhao Guifan didn't have any reaction. She just continued to walk forward. There were sidewalks on both sides of the adit mine, and in the middle was the mine cart track. Zhao Guifan walked all the way along the track. After walking for about 10 minutes, a fork suddenly appeared in front of her. One to the left, the other to the right. However, Zhao Guifan didn't stop at all. She turned and walked directly into the fork on the right. Therefore, it could be seen that this crazy woman obviously came here often before, so she was very familiar with this place. After walking for about 40 minutes, Zhao Guifan finally came to the end. She stood at the end of the passage for a while, and then a smile suddenly appeared on her withered old face. As if she saw something, Zhao Guifan quickly went up to greet her. "Son, mother is here to see you," Zhao Guifan said, while squatting in front of the plant at the end of the mine. This was a very strange scene. The mine was an extremely damp and gloomy place that didn't see the sun all day long, but a plant actually appeared. The plant's stem was upright, and the plant was tall, about 1 meter tall. Its appearance was very similar to a reed, but the color was completely different. Reeds were also called reeds. The so-called reeds were green, and the white dew was frost. Reeds were green in spring, but in autumn, they would wither and turn yellow. It was the end of winter and the beginning of spring, and most of the plants outside were still in a withered state. But this reed-like plant that grew in the deepest part of the mine was bright red. It was bright red, and in terms of the degree of beauty, it was even more beautiful than the sea of poppy flowers. This was a very strange scene. A crazy woman in a wedding robe, at this moment, was like a kind mother, squatting on the ground and rubbing her cheek against the red reed. The reed leaves gently brushed against her face, but she was like her son's hand caressing her cheek, very warm and comfortable. She silently stood behind Zhao Guifan. When he saw this plant for the first time, he already understood why Zhao Guifan had gone crazy. Her madness was because of this plant in front of him. Although this plant looked very similar to a reed, it was not a reed at all, but a harmful plant called bloodthorn by immortal cultivators. Bloodthorn was not a very common plant in the heavenly jade world. The reason it was called bloodthorn was because this plant was bright red, and it could emit a special fragrance to attract prey to come close. Once the prey came close, their soul would be taken, and they would willingly let it suck their blood. It was strange enough that a plant that only existed in the heavenly jade world appeared on earth, but what made Shi feel even more strange was, bloodthorn was a clump of plants, and as long as it grew, it would definitely grow in patches, like reeds forming a reed marsh. But there was only one bloodthorn in front of him, and it grew in such a remote and gloomy abandoned mine. Chapter 2:16. At the end of the dark and damp abandoned passageway, Zhao Guifan squatted beside the bloodthorn, constantly rubbing the bloodthorn's leaves with her cheeks. The tender and beautiful leaves suddenly formed a sharp contrast with Zhao Guifen's wrinkled, haggard and pale cheeks. If one looked carefully, they would find that the blood thorn's leaves were like countless tiny tentacles, tightly attached to Zhao Guifen's cheeks. It was absorbing Zhao Guifen's blood essence through the leaves, but Zhao Guifen seemed to feel very comfortable. Looking at her affectionate attitude towards the blood thorn, she would probably stay here for a while every night. It was no wonder that a crazy woman like Zhao Guifen could go up the mountain in the middle of the night without any obstructions. It turned out that she had come here too many times and was already familiar with the way. Zhao Guifen was a few years younger than Aunt Zhang, but now she looked like an 80 or 90-year-old woman, haggard and withered, like she was about to die. Fortunately, there was only one blood thorn here, and not a clump. Otherwise, Zhao Guifen's soul would have been scattered, and she would have turned into a dried corpse lying in this secluded mine, growing mold and maggots. Although the blood thorn was a harmful plant, it was different from the plants on Earth. This was a magical plant that could affect the mind of its prey, and rely on devouring the prey's soul and blood essence to nourish itself. However, the blood thorn's roots and leaves were not poisonous, and had great medicinal value, so it was often used as the main ingredient in medicine by immortal cultivators. Zhao Guifen had been eroded by the blood thorn for a long time, and she was already half a step into the gates of hell. In her current situation, even Chen Shi couldn't do anything to save her. Death was only a matter of time. In fact, this crazy woman was quite pitiful. He didn't know what kind of sins she committed in her previous life. Not only did she lose her son at such an old age, but she herself was also turned into something neither human nor ghost by this blood thorn. Her fate was really full of misfortune. Thinking of this, Chen Shi could not help but sigh deeply, and then gently waved his arm. A wave of vital energy suddenly wrapped around Zhao Guifen, pulling her back from the blood thorn. However, just as Zhao Guifen was being pulled away by Chen Shi, the blood thorn suddenly began to dance without any wind. Its leaves kept shaking like a person who was dancing, making a series of rustling sounds. Immediately after, an invisible spiritual attack suddenly erupted from Xue Ji's body. Animals and insects had intelligence, so why couldn't plants? Furthermore, this was no ordinary plant. Therefore, when it was interrupted by Chen Shi, this blood thorn immediately became very manic. As its branches and leaves swayed, it directly attacked Chen Shi. In the heavenly jade domain, a large-scale blood thorn sea would be classified as a forbidden area by cultivators, and no one would trespass. This was because in addition to causing hallucinations to trap prey, this plant could also directly launch a mental attack. An ant could not bite an elephant to death, but what if the ants became a disaster? The overwhelming number of ants swarmed forward. Not to mention the elephant, even the blue whale would be eaten up in an instant. Although there was only one blood thorn here, it was still very aggressive. After discovering Chen Shi, it directly launched an invisible spiritual attack at Chen Shi. But it was a pity, it did not know who it had provoked today. Without seeing Chen Shi do anything, he just stared and the soil under the blood thorn directly loosened and exploded. Then, Chen Shi gently waved at the blood thorn. This blood thorn was immediately uprooted by an invisible vital energy and flew directly into his hand. When the blood thorn was planted on the ground, it was about a meter tall. After being uprooted, the roots below were at least 30 centimeters long. Its roots were similar to the roots of a reed, and there were many adventitious roots on it. When the blood thorn was uprooted by Chen Shi, the adventitious roots on its roots suddenly twisted crazily like earthworms, which looked very disgusting. The blood thorn lived by devouring souls and blood essence. After being used as medicine, it would naturally be very beneficial to the soul and blood essence of immortal cultivators. Wasn't this the main ingredient that Chen Shi lacked now? The blood thorn kept twisting in Chen Shi's hand, and at the same time, it kept trying to send out spiritual attacks to disturb Chen Shi's thoughts. Chen Shi found it long-winded, so he directly grabbed its stem with both hands. Following a soft, ka sound, Yi Zichen's eyes lit up. This blood thorn was directly broken into two by him. The world was finally quiet. Because Zhao Guifan was directly pulled back by Chen Shi, she was now unconscious. After Chen Shi cast a meditation spell on her, he used vital energy to support her and then walked back along the original path. When Chen Shi came to the fork again, he suddenly stopped. The mine was very quiet. There were usually bats in the cave, but it was winter now. Although bats were warm-blooded animals, they also needed to hibernate. So this abandoned mine was very quiet, and only the faint sound of water dripping could be heard. Chen Shi stood at the fork and paused for a moment. When he stepped out again, he did not walk towards the cave entrance, but went to the left tunnel that he did not go to just now. This abandoned mine was a little interesting. It actually grew a blood thorn that only existed in the heavenly jade domain. Since he was already here, he naturally had to explore the inside and outside of the mine tonight to see if there was anything rare in here. Chen Shi walked along the left tunnel. Zhao Guifan was being guided by his vital energy, lying flat and floating behind him. Plus, there was the fluorescent green light above Chen Shi's head. If this scene was seen by others, it would not be as simple as causing them to lose their minds, they would directly be scared to death. The mine tunnel on the left was obviously the main tunnel. After Chen Shi walked for a while, the mine tunnel suddenly changed from one track to two, and the width on both sides obviously increased by a lot. This should be the main mining area. Along the way, there were many forks in the road, but Chen Shi didn't hesitate at all. She didn't even look at those forks, and just went straight down the main road. He had already discovered the abnormality here. In the depths of this abandoned mine, there was a paradise with abundant spirit energy. The spirit energy here was even richer than in the Qinling Mountains. It was probably because this place happened to be in the position of the dragon vein of this mountain, so after the spirit energy recovered, this place directly became a paradise. Chen Shi walked along the main tunnel for about 10 minutes before he finally stopped. Because a huge cave suddenly appeared in front of him. This cave was like a flask. The passage Chen Shi was in was the narrow mouth of the flask, and the inside of the cave was the belly of the flask. Chen Shi walked into the cave, and the surrounding terrain suddenly opened up. This cave was about 4 or 5 meters high, and the actual area was about the size of a basketball court. It was not too big, but it looked very strange. Obviously, the miners would not be so bored as to dig such a strange cave in the coal mine. Chapter 217. Chen Shi quietly stood at the entrance of the cave. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at the top of the cave. He seemed to have seen something, but because the surrounding light was too dim, he gently snapped his fingers. Under the surge of true essence, the ball of fluorescent green light suspended in mid-air suddenly flew to the center of the cave, and then became brighter and brighter. Then, the ball of light directly turned from green to white, and constantly bloomed with dazzling light. The ball of light emitted a strong light like the summer sun, and instantly lit up every corner of the cave. In an instant, the light was as bright as day, and the fine details could be seen clearly. With the light source, Chen Shi directly walked into the cave with Zhao Guifan. At this time, he raised his head again and looked at the top of the cave. There were actually 3 people hanging above the cave. He saw that in the center of the cave, about 3 meters above the ground, a wooden beam was placed on the wall at both ends of the cave. And on this beam, there were 3 people in red wedding robes hanging in order. The 3 of them had their heads down, and their faces were facing down. Their hair was messy, and their long hair hung down naturally, covering their faces. Therefore, it was impossible to tell whether they were male or female, and even whether they were dead or alive. They were hung on the beam with their heads down, and their appearance was somewhat similar to the cured meat that was hung outside the balcony in winter, one after another, and arranged very neatly. What was even more strange was that these people's feet were tied with thick ropes, and there was a medium-sized weight hanging on their feet. The weight was tied with a thin rope, and it hung on their feet, naturally hanging to the ground. And below the weight, there was a wooden basin filled with clear water. In addition, around the wooden basin, there were 3 small incense burners, and they were in a tripartite formation, surrounding the basin in the middle. Each of the small incense burners had a red incense candle inserted into it. The incense candles were already lit, and a light breeze blew, and the candle flame was constantly dancing with the breeze. In the deepest part of the abandoned coal mine, such a strange scene actually appeared, and it was really a bit shocking. Chen Shi silently sized up the layout of the cave, then put Zhao Guifan down on the sidewalk outside the cave, and slowly walked into the depths of the cave. The beam was made of wood, the weight was made of gold, the clear water was made of water, the candle was made of fire, and the surrounding area was made of earth. Since it was an arrangement of the 5 elements, he could calculate the time. This year was the year of Wushu, the 2nd month of the lunar year was the 1st month of the lunar year, and the 8th day of the lunar year was the 1st day of the lunar year. Wushu is yang, Jiayin is yang, Bingshu is yang. Yang year, yang month, yang day. Once the sun rose, it would be 1/4 noon, which was also the legendary time of the sun. It was clearly a sunny day, but Chen Shi found such a sinister and evil arrangement in this gloomy and abandoned mine. Now that was interesting. Chen Shi swaggered into the depths of the cave. At this moment, the person who had been sitting cross-legged on the ground slowly opened his eyes when he heard his footsteps. Yes, there was a person in the cave. That person was sitting cross-legged on the futon below the 3 people in red. He was about 40 years old, wearing a black robe, with a cold face, and a bun on the top of his head. This dressing was somewhat like a priest in a Daoist temple. He didn't open his eyes when Chen Shi lit up the cave. Until Chen Shi walked directly into the cave without even saying hello, the person finally couldn't help but open his eyes. After opening his eyes, he first looked up at the light ball suspended above the cave, then looked at Chen Shi and asked, "Mister, why are you here so late at night?" Hearing this, Chen Shi asked with interest, "Are you an alchemist?" "No, I'm a warlock." "Warlock?" Seeing Chen Shi's puzzled look, the person couldn't help but look at him a few more times, then asked curiously, "You don't know about warlocks?" "I really don't know, I wonder if Mister can explain it to me." Alchemist, warlock, and sorcerer. Since Qin Shi Huang killed the alchemists, the theory of yin and yang disasters arose in Western Han. Because of the different ideas, the sorcerer was divided into 2 factions, alchemist and warlock. I'm the successor of the warlock. Alchemist? Warlock? Chen Shi pondered for a moment, then asked again, "What's the difference between the 2? However, when the person heard Chen Shi's question, it was as if he had heard a joke. He couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. In terms of origin, there's no difference between the 2. The reason why there are 2 different factions, alchemist and warlock, is just because those hypocrites insist on the distinction between good and evil. What is good? What is evil? Alchemists are good, warlocks are evil. This is the difference between alchemists and warlocks. Hearing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but glance at the layout of the cave. His heart suddenly had the most intuitive understanding of the warlock. Even cultivation had to use such evil methods. No wonder the world said that warlocks were evil. This really wasn't slandering them. "Thank you, Mister, for your explanation, but I still have a question to ask." "Please ask." It was just the first time they met, but the 2 of them were like old friends, asking and answering questions. It was really a bit magical. "I want to ask, why did Mister arrange this?" Chen Shi said while pointing at the 3 red-clothed people hanging on the beam. Hearing this, that person glanced at the blood-thorn grass in Chen Shi's hand with deep meaning. Then, he suddenly laughed out loud. He seemed to be very proud of his masterpiece. After raising his head to look at the 3 red-clothed people above him, that person proudly introduced to Chen Shi, "This is a cultivation method that I have spent several decades of effort to create. I have combined many inheritances in the world and went through untold hardships to create. I have named it, 5 Elements Soul Refining Technique. The red-clothed soul locks, the weight drops the soul, 1 foot above the ground, the soul can't escape with the earth, so the soul stays. The soul guide needle opens the Niwen palace, leads the soul out of the body, hangs on the beam, and hooks the soul with wood. The water and fire array is placed below the feet, the water melts the soul, the fire tempers the soul, so it can remove the impurities of the soul. 1 out of 10, only 1 part of the essence will be drawn into the body. After the essence enters the body, you must immediately enter a meditative state, using the essence as a guide to circulate 36 small cycles. When the essence is exhausted, you will circulate 18 large cycles. The external essence will guide your own essence. After completing the cycle, you will not leave each other, touching the heavenly acupoints to open the jade door. If the jade door is opened, it means that you have successfully condensed your essence, and you have stepped onto the path of immortality. After the man explained the layout of the cave, he looked at Xianxia with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, "I've been thinking about this set of techniques for many years, but I haven't been able to perfect it, until last year, when I accidentally found this mysterious plant. I finally understood the crux of it, and perfected this 5-element soul-refining technique." As he spoke, he pointed at the blood thorn in Xianxia's hand. The expression on his face became playful. However, Xianxia didn't have the self-awareness of a thief. He picked up the blood thorn and casually glanced at it, then nodded and smiled. "Although this blood thorn can steal souls, it is only a plant. I didn't expect you to be able to comprehend the truth of cultivation from it. It is truly admirable. Zhang Sanfeng is probably not much better than this." Xianxia wasn't lying. This person was born on a planet like Earth, but he was able to rely on his own exploration to find the threshold of cultivation. If this kind of talent was placed in the heavenly jade world, there was no way to imagine what he would achieve now. Chapter 218. Immortals believe in it, but not in it. Go has no golden bones, not listed on the pill platform. Disciples pass on the fasting method, pill-burning scripture. Only asking for hard work, in 100 years you will not succeed. Sad dream of immortals, a dream that misleads a lifetime. Sad dream of immortals, a dream that misleads a lifetime. Compared to the Song of Everlasting Regret, Bai Zhi's dream of immortals was not very famous. The whole poem was about a person who dreamed that he ascended on a white crane and met the Jade Emperor. The Jade Emperor said that he had the talent to cultivate immortality, so he abandoned his wife and daughter and hid in the mountains for decades. However, he failed to become an immortal and wasted his life. Wasn't the person standing in front of Xianxia the real-life dream of immortals? If the jade door opened, it meant that he had successfully condensed his qi and stepped into the path of immortality. This person actually managed to find the right direction by relying on his own groping. Such talent and aptitude really made people exclaim in admiration. But unfortunately, when one's strength was limited, one could only do one's best and wait for destiny. Now that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth had recovered and was so abundant, by refining the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, one could gradually accumulate true essence and then use it to break through the jade door. Once this door opened, one could naturally step into the early stage of qi refinement. Although he had found the right direction, his cultivation method was wrong, which led him to go astray and create this extremely evil 5-element soul-refining technique. Just like the great star-sucking technique, it seemed to allow one's cultivation to progress rapidly, but in reality, it was not far from qi deviation. Therefore, Xianxia asked seriously, "May I know your name, sir?" Hearing this, the person laughed and said, "My surname is Sun, and my name is One. I am of the lineage of the virtuous master, and have a history of nearly 2,000 years. Mr. Sun, you said that if the jade door opened, one would step into the path of immortality. Is this the so-called immortal secret technique?" After saying this, Xianxia pointed at the strange layout in the cave. He had a half-smile on his face. It looked like he was asking for guidance, but in fact, he was questioning. As expected, when Sun Wen heard Xianxia's question, his expression suddenly froze. But then, he suddenly laughed even louder than before. Fellow Daoist, that's a good question. This old man has been searching for the Tao of immortality for more than 60 years. It was only a few years ago that I finally figured it out. Actually, there are no immortals in this world. No immortals? Then why did you say you stepped onto the immortal Tao? Everyone says that one can ascend to immortality as soon as the heavenly gate is opened. Then I would like to ask, in the past 100 years, has anyone ascended to immortality? Successfully flew into the gate of heaven? I'm afraid they haven't even seen the shadow of the heavenly gate. They worship ancient books all day long as if they're their ancestors. Can they become immortals just like that? Hearing this, Xianxia looked at Sun Wen thoughtfully and didn't say anything. When Sun Wen saw his expression, he immediately smiled proudly and said, "In fact, as far as this old man knows, this celestial being is not the end, but the starting point." As soon as these words were spoken, they resounded throughout the cave like the sound of metal being thrown to the ground. The celestial being was not the end, but the starting point. In a sense, this statement was not wrong. The celestial being was almost above the foundation establishment stage and below the Jindan stage. They who had yet to condense a golden core could only be regarded as low-level cultivators. They had not touched the threshold of the immortal Tao at all. At this point, Sun Wen suddenly let out a burst of strange laughter as if he was mocking something. He said with a look of disdain, "Those people keep talking about Elysium all day long and count on Elysium for everything. They're completely putting the cart before the horse. The path of flowers has never been swept by a destined guest, but the gate of heaven has been opened for you from now on. It's not that one can only ascend to immortality after opening the gate of heaven, but that the gate of heaven will only be opened for you when one's cultivation has succeeded." Very insightful. Xianxia nodded sincerely, expressing his agreement with Sun Wen's words. Sun Wen's point of view was completely different from the village's point of view. Clearly, there was still a lot of debate about the legend of the gate of heaven in this world. Xianxia didn't say anything. After Sun Wen finished his last sentence, he suddenly closed his mouth and looked at him with a faint smile. The cave was strangely quiet. A gust of cold wind came from nowhere. When the wind blew, the three red-clothed people hanging on the beam suddenly started to sway. It looked like three red-clothed female ghosts were dancing in the cave. Xianxia held the blood-thorn grass and stood casually not far from the cave entrance. Sun Wen looked at the bold young man in front of him with a half-smile. After a moment of silence, Xianxia finally broke the silence. "I have another question to ask." "Please speak." "Sir, why are you telling me these things?" Hearing this, Sun Wen suddenly laughed and said, "This old man has been in seclusion for a long time, and it's been many years since I've chatted with someone like today." Speaking of this, Sun Wen's expression changed, and a fierce light appeared in his eyes. He said coldly, "You and I can be considered to be fated, but unfortunately, in addition to trespassing on my cave residence today, you also destroyed the immortal grass that I have painstakingly cultivated for many years. I'm afraid you can only pay for this with your life." Why would he say so much to a young man he didn't know? Wasn't it because he had created a peerless cultivation method, but there was no way to publicize it? Only the dead could keep a secret. Therefore, from the moment Xianxia stepped into the cave, Sun Wen had no intention of letting him leave alive. Seeing this, Xianxia couldn't help but sigh deeply and said, "Sir, you have great talent, but it's a pity that you've gone astray." "What a pity." With that, he held the blood-thorn grass with his right hand and raised his left hand, making an inviting gesture to Sun Wen. Seeing this, Sun Wen's face turned cold, and he couldn't figure out this young man's background. This was obviously his immortal's cave, yet this young man had such a confident appearance. Could it be that he had some backing? Thinking of this, Sun Wen frowned and asked, "Who exactly are you?" "Me?" Xianxia smiled, and suddenly an idea popped up in his mind, so he said to Sun Wen, "Wu Lian, Special Affairs Department." Special Affairs Department, Special Affairs Department Office. Compared to the Emergency Department, the Special Affairs Department was the real main department of the Wu Lian. Obviously, Sun Wen wasn't really cut off from the world, so when he heard Chen Shi say the word Special Affairs Department, his face instantly darkened, and he immediately rushed towards Chen Shi. In the eyes of Huaxia's cultivators, the word Wu Lian was a very unlucky existence. This organization was part of the country's power, and once Sun Wen's secret was discovered by the Wu Lian, it would be no different from being stuck with dog skin plaster. Unless he left Huaxia, what awaited him would be the Wu Lian's endless pursuit. After dealing with this young man, he would have to find another place to cultivate in seclusion. Sun Wen was slightly different from great-granduncle. Great-granduncle was a martial artist, from the outside to the inside. Sun Wen was a sorcerer, from the inside to the outside. Therefore, their fighting styles were very different. When Sun Wen rushed towards Chen Shi, he suddenly waved his right hand, his 5 fingers forming a claw, and fiercely clawed at Chen Shi. A black shadow suddenly flew out from his hand. Then, the black shadow seemed to have turned into a malicious spirit, its face contorted as it screamed. The ghost didn't make any sound, but at this moment, a sharp, ear-piercing howl suddenly rang in Chen Shi's mind. The sound was like the sound of 2 pieces of foam rubbing against each other. It was exceptionally harsh and unpleasant to the ear, and could instantly cause goosebumps to rise on anyone who heard it. Using a killing move right from the start, Sun Wen really wasn't prepared to let this young man leave alive today. Yellow Sky Path of Spirits. Samsara Impermanence. The first of every month, the routine of asking for monthly votes. Chapter 219. Sun Wen's claw was very similar to the 9-yin white bone claw. As he waved his claw, a ghost shadow suddenly appeared in the air and went straight for Chen Shi. Looking at the way the ghost was moving, it was obvious that this move must be a combination of internal and external attacks. Not only could it hurt the enemy's body physically, but it could also affect the enemy's soul spiritually. It was extremely evil. The malicious ghosts kept howling, and invisible sound waves came one after another. Chen Shi was not affected at all. He stood in place with a smile, and his heart was constantly trying to figure out Sun Wen's cultivation method. When the black shadow was about to pounce on him, Chen Shi finally made a move. He raised his left hand and pointed a finger at it. That black shadow was like a shadow that had seen the sun. It screamed miserably and disappeared in midair. Sun Wen could not help but raise his eyebrows when he saw this. He knew that he had encountered a tough opponent today. After Sun Wen called himself a virtuous teacher, he was actually the successor of Zhang Jiao. As a top-notch necromancer after Su Fu, Zhang Jiao had attained a peerless cultivation base with the art of peace and peace that he had obtained from an unknown source. Because of that, he was honored as a great teacher. The impermanence of samsara came from the Taiping essential technique, and it was an upgraded version that Sun Wen improved with the 5 elements soul refining technique. He did not expect that Chen Shi could easily break it with one finger. How could Sun Wen not be surprised? How was this a young man? He was clearly an old monster who had a technique to retain his youthful appearance. In fact, Sun Wen was not a middle-aged man. He was born during the Daoguang era of the Qing dynasty and was already more than 180 years old. Sun Wen's talent was indeed far superior to ordinary people. As the only remaining successor of the Taiping path, he had already stepped into the soul conduit realm in his 40s under the guidance of his master. He was known as the Taiping Heavenly Master. After becoming a Heavenly Master, Sun Wen was not willing to be mediocre. Instead, he began to travel around to find a way to go further. Sun Wen was different from great-granduncle. He did not believe that the Heavenly Gate could allow people to ascend. Therefore, he had never counted on the Heavenly Gate. Instead, he had been quietly cultivating. He practiced diligently all day long, which made his cultivation far superior to great-granduncle. In fact, Sun Wen was only one step away from being able to form the three flowers and truly step into the Golden Core realm. With the revival of the spirit qi of heaven and earth, Sun Wen had also found a way to cultivate qi. Perhaps if he was given enough time, Sun Wen would be able to carve out a path of his own. Regardless of whether it was good or evil, as long as he could continue down this path, then it was the right path. Unfortunately, Sun Wen met Chen Shi today. He was like a walking steel plate in this world, therefore, when Sun Wen saw that his move was easily broken by Chen Shi, he immediately stopped and asked with a frown, "Who are you?" "I've already told you. It's the Wu Lian Special Affairs Department." Sun Wen was clearly dissatisfied with this answer. Therefore, he coldly shouted in anger, pretending to be mysterious. "Since that's the case, I'll capture you first and then slowly interrogate you." After he finished speaking, Sun Wen's black robes began to flutter even though there was no wind. A strong storm suddenly blew in the cave. Two long dragons of murderous aura rolled out from Sun Wen's sleeves like tornadoes in the desert, roaring as they rushed towards Chen Shi. These two tornadoes were actually formed by Sun Wen's magical power. In the process of rushing towards Chen Shi, the two tornadoes even intertwined with each other, turning into a sharp, cone-shaped cyclone. The cyclone spun rapidly like a sharp knife. Like a high-speed drill, when the cyclone rushed towards Chen Shi, it also tore a vacuum in the air. This move was monstrous, but when Chen Shi saw it, he shook his head in disappointment. Compared to the improved version of the Samsara Impermanence, this move did not have any special features. It looked powerful, but in fact, it was the simplest way to use vital essence. It was just using brute force to break through all techniques. This was also a method that Chen Shi often used. Perhaps he wanted to force Sun Wen to take out his trump card. So when the cyclone rushed towards him, Chen Shi raised his left hand, like fishing in the water, he directly reached into the center of the cyclone, and then, he squeezed hard. This fierce cyclone was like a poisonous snake that was pinched by him. After struggling helplessly for a while, it turned into countless bursts of energy and dissipated. The qi that scattered in all directions hit the rock walls of the cave, and like a machine gun, countless stones fell from the rock walls with a crackling sound. The rubble fell to the ground, and a rustling sound was heard. Under Sun Wen's incredulous gaze, Chen Shi calmly raised an index finger, then smiled slightly. "You still have one last chance to make a move, don't let me down." Hearing this, Sun Wen could not help but widen his eyes, the hair on his body stood up, and the expression on his face was like he had seen a ghost. It was no wonder he was afraid. The move just now was Sun Wen's own killing move. In terms of lethality, it was a bit stronger than the Samsara Impermanence. It was not that he was boasting, but as long as this move was used, even a great master in the gang state would be instantly turned into minced meat. But after Chen Shi put her hand in, she acted as if nothing had happened. Sun Wen couldn't help but have some thoughts of retreating. Who was this young man? Did he come here specifically for him? Because he could not figure out Chen Shi's background, the expression on Sun Wen's face became more and more dignified. When he saw that Chen Shi was still as calm as before, Sun Wen had to seriously consider Chen Shi's words. Last chance to make a move? Thinking of this, Sun Wen could not help but look at Chen Shi, as if he wanted to say something. But after hesitating for a moment, he just sighed deeply, and the expression on his face became quite complicated. Today was the Yang year, the Yang month, and the Yang day. It was the rare time of the highest Yang. The depths of the abandoned mine had become quite due to the lack of sunlight all day long. In addition to Sun Wen's arrangement, this place was now a place of extreme and extreme evil. Extreme Yang time, extreme place. Extreme and extreme Yang. He wanted to use this arrangement to help him break through to the celestial being realm, but he did not expect this arrangement to become his killing move in the end. Thinking of this, Sun Wen could not help but clench his teeth. He suddenly put his hands together in front of his chest and directly made various seals. As he kept making seals, a yin and yang formation slowly condensed and formed in front of his chest. Seeing this, Chen Shi was not anxious at all. He was now like a cat teasing a mouse. Because this was the first time Chen Shi came into contact with a necromancer, he wanted to thoroughly understand the cultivation system of the necromancer lineage. He only gave Sun Wen 3 chances to make a move. This was already the 3rd time. Sun Wen was a smart person, so naturally, he would not waste this opportunity. Therefore, when he began to focus and gather qi, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the vicinity suddenly shook violently. Sure enough, Sun Wen had comprehended the truth of heaven and earth and began to try to use the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to cooperate with his casting. Probably because it was his first time using this move, Sun Wen took a long time to prepare. Chen Shi waited quietly. His curiosity was completely piqued by Sun Wen. He wanted to see what kind of amazing move a cultivation genius like Sun Wen would create. Because Earth was different from heavenly spiral, perhaps he could learn something from it? Chen Shi was looking forward to it. And Sun Wen did not disappoint him. When the yin and yang formation condensed in front of Sun Wen's chest, it immediately turned into a black and white yin and yang fish. Then, it began to slowly spin and flow. The yin and yang fish spun faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, the 2 yin and yang fish seemed to have completely merged into one, turning into a hazy gray that represented chaos. Black and white blended and returned to chaos. At this moment, Sun Wen suddenly let out a roar. Immediately after, blood began to ooze out of his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. Bleeding from all orifices. Seeing this, Chen Shi could not help but be stunned for a moment before he suddenly came back to his senses. Sun Wen was burning his blood essence. As expected. When Sun Wen began to burn his blood essence, the aura on his body suddenly rose and exploded. The yin and yang fish in front of his chest also completely turned into a gray ball of light because of the rapid rotation. Sun Wen let out another roar. His sleeves bulged like a dragon, and then he suddenly pushed the light ball outward. Then, the gray light ball suddenly carried an indescribable aura and directly pressed toward Chen Shi. Yin-Yang Calamity Mountain River Seal. Destroy. Chapter 220. Tai Chi gave birth to Yin and Yang gave birth to the 4 divisions, and the 4 divisions gave birth to the 8 trigrams. Tai Chi was the fusion of vitality before heaven and earth were separated. It was the beginning and the unity of the universe. Simply put, Tai Chi represented chaos and Yin and Yang. The 4 divisions were the 5 elements. Metal, wood, water, and fire represented north, south, east, and west respectively. Earth was in the center of the 4 divisions and did not exist in the cycle of the 4 divisions. Therefore, it was also called the central earth, representing heaven and earth. Only with heaven and earth would there be the 4 divisions. Without heaven and earth, there would naturally be no 4 divisions. Therefore, earth was the first of the 5 elements and the beginning of all things. The mountain and river seal belonged to the earth element. This was Sun Wen's strongest killing move. The moment the mountain and river seal was formed, Chen Shi could not help but raise his eyebrows. He could not help but have a serious expression on his face. Sun Wen had actually seen through the 5 elements and reversed Yin and Yang from the 4 divisions. From this, he had touched the true essence of Tai Chi with his strength as a peak diviner. He had actually struck out an attack that was not inferior to the divine generals when he burned his essence blood. Just this move alone was enough for Sun Wen to surpass many cultivators in this world. Just as the black and white yin-yang fish turned into a gray ball of light due to the high-speed rotation, Sun Wen's face deteriorated at a speed visible to the naked eye. Just now, he looked like a middle-aged man in his 40s. However, in the blink of an eye, his hair and beard were all white. He looked like an old man with half a foot in the ground. His haggard and weak appearance was somewhat similar to Zhao Guifan, who had lost her young soul and had her blood sucked by the blood thorns all day long. Blood flowed from his 7 orifices and his face was rapidly aging. However, Sun Wen's eyes suddenly flashed with joy. After pushing the gray ball of light towards Chen Shi, he couldn't hold it in anymore and let out a long howl of excitement. Success! The gray ball of light was formed by Sun Wen's true essence and Dharma power. It contained his lifetime of cultivation. It was like a ball of smoke in a bubble. As it flew toward Chen Shi, the ball of light seemed to be constantly rolling and rising. In terms of appearance, there was nothing strange about it. However, in Chen Shi's opinion, this ball of light was not simple. Sun Wen did not disappoint him. Thus, Chen Shi couldn't help but laugh. Earth element? You've come at the right time. Watch me use my lightning technique to break your earth element technique. The 5 elements mutually reinforce and counteract each other. Zhen represented thunder, and Sun represented wind. Zhen and Sun belonged to wood, and wood restrained earth. Thunder just so happened to restrain earth. After saying that, Chen Shi suddenly let go of the blood-thorn grass in his hand. Then, a blue light appeared in his hand out of thin air. In that instant, lightning appeared in the void, and thunder exploded. Chen Shi stood proudly with the thunderbolt in his hand. Since Sun Wen was not a celestial being, he would control his cultivation base to that of a celestial being. It was also a form of respect for him to deal with someone of the same level. Thunder versus Earth. 49 Forms of Heavenly Divination, Spell Chapter, Thunder Art of Delusion. Chen Shi was like a god descending, holding 2 thunderbolts in his hands. The blue lightning was like a venomous snake spitting out its tongue, constantly bubbling in Chen Shi's palm. When the gray ball of light flew towards him, Chen Shi opened his arms and fanned at the gray ball of light as if he was waving a banana fan. The thunderbolt and the gray ball collided in the air. In an instant, the aura energy shot out in all directions, and the surging true essence instantly set off an earth-shattering explosion in the cave. The abandoned mine that had long been dilapidated collapsed under the impact of the explosion, instantly turning into a pile of ruins. Ding! Chen Shi arrived at the 108 National Highway. At this moment, his phone suddenly rang. He picked up his phone and opened it. It was a push message from Tencent News. #Earthquake News February 24, 04, 17 a.m., a magnitude 3.2 earthquake occurred in the Xingxian area of Yuyu City. The tremor was not strong. The final result is based on the official report. As the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. After the Tangshan earthquake, 2 major earthquakes occurred in Wuxia in succession. This also meant that everyone began to pay more attention to news about earthquakes. It was estimated that the news of the earthquake in Yucheng would spread all over the country again tomorrow. After Chen Shi finished reading this news, he opened his contact list and found the name Qin Shuecheng in the contact list. Then, he dialed the number. Although it was 4 in the morning, after the phone rang twice, Qin Shuecheng directly picked up. Obviously, she was not sleeping, but cultivating. Hello? I just met a person. Sun Wen, do you know him? Sun Wen? I seem to have an impression of him, but I'm not very sure. Wait a moment, I'll check first. After saying that, Qin Shuecheng directly hung up the phone, obviously to make a call to verify. His sister-in-law was really swift and decisive. Chen Shi held the phone and waited for about 5 minutes before she called back. I found him. Sun Wen, from the Way of Peace, celestial level. He was born in the Daoguang era of the Qing dynasty. The last time he appeared was 20 years ago. At this point, Qin Shuecheng's tone could not help but be a little confused. She asked, "How did you meet such an old monster?" Yeah, I don't know if I'm lucky or he's unlucky. Send someone here. He's a celestial after all. Capturing him for a vivisection seems to be a contribution to society, right? After Qianxi's voice fell, there was no sound from the other end of the phone for a long time. Qin Shueqing thought that Qianxi only met Sun Wen face to face, but now that she heard the meaning of his words, did this mean that he was going to capture Sun Wen alive? Capturing a celestial alive? Her sister-in-law was stunned for a while before she came back to her senses. Then, she jumped out of bed slightly agitatedly and said quickly, "I'll bring someone over right away." "What's the address?" "I'll send you the location." "Okay." Qianxi would not joke with her on this kind of issue, so Qin Shueqing did not have any doubts at all. After hanging up the phone, she left the Sai courtyard. The Wu Lian had been established for so many years, but they had never captured a celestial alive. Who knew how much credit this was? In fact, it was not that the Wu Lian could not capture a celestial. It was just that capturing a celestial required extremely careful arrangements, and it would even cause a lot of trouble. Right now, everything was about maintaining stability. Therefore, Wu Lian could only turn a blind eye to the existence of the celestials. As long as they did not go too far, the Wu Lian would not encircle and annihilate them. Qianxi did not kill Sun Wen. Sun Wen was worthy of respect. After all, objectively speaking, if Sun Wen cultivated in the Tianyuan world for 500 years, perhaps his achievements would far surpass Qianxi's. This was talent. Wasn't talent the most lacking in the 21st century? Although Sun Wen was not a good person, Qianxi was not a judge after all. Handing him over to the Wu Lian and letting the Wu Lian deal with him was really a contribution to society. Chapter 221. The next day. Dawn had just broken when the villagers who had woken up early realized that there were many police cars in the village. Actually, the earthquake last night had awakened quite a number of people. However, Rain City had already experienced 2 major earthquakes, so a magnitude 3 or 4 earthquake was no different from a scratch in everyone's eyes. Therefore, the villagers who had woken up early did not discuss the earthquake last night. Instead, they gathered at the entrance to the mountain and whispered to each other about the situation on the mountain. The path up the mountain had already been sealed off by the police. Once the villagers got close, they would be politely asked to leave by the police. According to Old Wang, who had woken up at 6:00 to feed the chickens, he had even seen an armored vehicle drive up the mountain with his own eyes. Old Wang was a person who liked to talk big all the time, so everyone snorted at his words. If an armored vehicle was here, why didn't he say that there were planes and tanks? In the end, Old Wang had a flash of inspiration. He pointed at the new tire marks on the ground and asked everyone to examine them. Only then did everyone reluctantly believe his words. There were many families in Jianghu who were professional truck drivers. Therefore, they were very knowledgeable about tire marks. The tire marks on the yellow dirt road did not seem to be left behind by a truck. The police were standing guard and the army was going up the mountain, so what exactly happened on the mountain? Everyone was very puzzled, but no one would tell them. When the little fellow woke up, it was already 9:00 in the morning. She had slept very deeply. Even after waking up, she was still in a daze for a long time. Qin Ruoying fetched a basin of hot water and helped the little fellow wash up in the living room. The little fellow turned her head in a daze and looked at the courtyard outside the old house. Her memory was still stuck on the night when she watched the movie. The little fellow blinked her eyes and looked outside the house. Then, she raised her head and looked at the decorations in the room. When she realized that she was in a completely unfamiliar environment, a puzzled expression appeared on her little face. Qin Ruoying put away the wash basin and hung up the towel. Just as she was about to bring her to the kitchen for breakfast, the little thing suddenly changed her face like a master of Sichuan opera. Her little mouth suddenly pouted, and she burst into tears with a "Wah." Her parents had actually taken her to such an unfamiliar place while she was asleep. This was something that the little guy could not accept at all. Perhaps it was because she was scared, or perhaps it was because she had been wronged, but the little girl was crying so hard that people couldn't help but want to hold her in their arms and take good care of her. Her crying alarmed everyone in the room. Auntie Zhang and Chen Shi were discussing the problem of making millet porridge in the kitchen. When they heard the commotion outside, they hurriedly walked out of the kitchen. When they came out, they just happened to see the little girl standing in the main hall with an aggrieved face and crying loudly. Qin Ruoying wanted to hug her, but she pushed her away with a pout. In the end, Auntie Zhang had to coax her. After telling her that this was her hometown, the little girl finally stopped crying. However, she was still unwilling to let Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying get close to her. Seeing this, the couple could only look at each other helplessly and smile. From the looks of it, they would have to coax her for a long time before she would forgive them. After breakfast, the family walked out of the house and prepared to see the situation outside. The army going up the mountain and the police standing guard was a big deal. Some of the villagers who liked to watch didn't even bother to eat their breakfast properly. They squatted by the roadside with a bowl of noodles and ate while going up the mountain. Xing County was not big, and there were only a few people in the county public security bureau. These young men in police uniforms were very impressive, but in reality, they might be someone's nephew. The police were also people. Although they knew that they had to keep it a secret, they really couldn't stand the continuous questioning. Thus, some of the ignorant youngsters secretly revealed some of the things that had happened on the mountain. It was said that the abandoned coal mine on the mountain was the source of the earthquake. After the earthquake, the Geological Survey Bureau found a rare mineral underneath. This kind of mineral was very rare in the world. It was said that it could be used to make an atomic bomb. Therefore, when Shangjing received the news, they immediately asked the County Public Security Bureau to cooperate with the armed police to guard the mine. The experts from Shangjing also flew over that night and were now exploring the mine. When did the people in the small mountain village hear such a mysterious story? Therefore, the whole village, men and women, old and young, gathered in front of the small road up the mountain. They all wanted to see what the mineral that could be used to make an atomic bomb looked like. If they could see the mineral with their own eyes, then they could boast to others in the future that the material to make an atomic bomb was dug out from their village. Chen Shi stood outside the crowd with the wronged little girl in his arms. After hearing the simple explanation of the situation, he was slightly speechless and laughed. Wu Yan was really amazing. In such a short time, he actually came up with such a decent excuse. Wu Yan probably did this kind of thing on a daily basis. After all, there were always a lot of things in this world that ordinary people could not achieve. They didn't even have the right to know. Most of the villagers were waiting at the intersection to see the atomic bomb. Chen Shi looked at the little girl for a while. After seeing that the little girl was still unhappy, he was ready to take her to dig winter bamboo shoots again. But just as Chen Shi and his family were about to leave, a saber-toothed tiger police armored vehicle suddenly drove down from the mountain. Seeing this, the villagers immediately let out a burst of enthusiastic cheers. The car was a special bulletproof car modified by a Ford Raptor. It was nearly 7 meters long, more than 3 meters tall, and weighed 6 tons. Its appearance was also very handsome. And behind this car, there were 3 warriors, which were real military off-road vehicles. The 4 cars slowly drove down from the mountain. Under the command of the police, the villagers retreated to the sides and made way for the cars. Chen Shi and his family stood on the 108 National Highway. While he was explaining to the little girl about the big cars in front of them, the saber-toothed tiger suddenly stopped in front of their family. Then, Qin Xueqing walked out from the front passenger seat. The sister-in-law first greeted Qin Ruoying. After calling her sister, she turned to look at Chen Shi and said to him quite seriously, "Thank you. It's nothing." Chen Shi waved his hand very casually, as if he didn't take this matter to heart at all. Hearing this, Qin Shuiqing nodded, then turned to look at Aunt Zhang and said to her very politely, "Aunt Zhang, I'm Qin Shuiqing. I've seen you in the courtyard before, but I was still young at that time. I don't know if you still remember me?" "Yes, of course I remember." Aunt Zhang was confused by Qin Shuiqing. Why was Yingying's sister sitting in the car? Aunt Zhang was not very familiar with Qin Shuiqing, so she didn't know what to talk to her about. Seeing this, Chen Shi interrupted in time and said, "Are you busy? Do you want to have lunch before leaving?" Chapter 222. Okay. Her nod shocked everyone present. Chen Shi was just being polite. He did not expect his sister-in-law to take it seriously. Hearing this, Chen Shi had to first glance at the few warriors parked behind the armored vehicle, and then asked, "Aren't you on a mission?" "The mission is complete. I can go back to Shangjing in the afternoon." "Oh. Okay then, let's talk about it after dinner." Qin Shuiqing opened the door and said a few words to the driver of the armored vehicle. Then, she followed Chen Shi and his family to Aunt Zhang's old house. Her actions immediately caused the surrounding villagers to whisper to each other in whispers. "Hey, look, that girl came down from the armored vehicle." "Yeah, why is she following Zhang San? Is she Zhang San's relative? That's crazy. Didn't they say that these people were experts from Shangjing? That young girl is an expert. She's from Xiaoqiu, she's from Shangjing." Later, it was an insider who answered everyone's questions. Aunt Zhang had been working as a nanny in Shangjing for the past few years. The young couple that she brought yesterday was her former employer. The expert from Shangjing probably knew Aunt Zhang's employer, which was why she was with them. After all, a family that could afford a nanny was probably not an ordinary family. It was natural for them to know an expert from Shangjing. Everyone thought about it and felt relieved. After the commotion, his sister-in-law also came to eat. But the little girl was still angry. As soon as she returned to the courtyard, she pouted and said that she wanted to go home. Seeing this, Chen Shi had to use the same trick that he used yesterday. He was going to promise the little girl that she would only stay here for one night. If she still wanted to go home the next day, her parents would take her home. However, today's situation was different from yesterday. Yesterday, she wanted to see the village, so after being coaxed and tricked by Chen Shi, although she was a bit unwilling, she didn't flip out on the spot. The reason why she was so angry today was that she found herself in a village when she woke up. In the little girl's mind, her parents did not discuss with her before secretly bringing her here. This was disrespectful to her, so she naturally flew into a rage. She really did not want to stay here for another day. She screamed for a long time. In the end, under the persuasion of Aunt Zhang and Qin Ruoying, the little girl pouted and reluctantly agreed to Chen Shi's condition. "Then we'll stay for one night. Just one night. Pinky promise." This silly girl did not know that she had already fallen into her father's trap yesterday. So, Chen Shi brought her to the bamboo forest to dig winter bamboo shoots. This time, there was no Zhao Guifan, so the little girl's digging very happily. When she heard that Chen Shi was going to use the winter bamboo shoots she dug out for lunch, the little thing was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth, and her hands and feet couldn't help but become much more nimble. It was a new experience for the little guy to eat the vegetables he picked with his own hands. Why were farmhouse dishes delicious? Wasn't it because she could just pick whatever she wanted to eat from the fields? Fresh ingredients were the prerequisite for cooking food. Not sure if it was a psychological effect, but today's bamboo forest did not seem as gloomy as yesterday. The sun was shining brightly in the sky. The bright sunlight shone on top of the bamboo forest, making the bamboo forest lush green, making people feel a trace of spring. The blood thorn was hung on the wall by Chen Shi. It was red and it formed a sharp contrast with the golden corn skewers next to it. In the village, everyone liked to hang chili and corn outside the house. First, it was for ventilation and dryness. Second, it was a symbol. Chili symbolized red and corn symbolized a bountiful harvest. Both were good omens. In fact, when Chen Shi saw Sun Wen's 5 elements soul refining technique, he already knew why Aunt Zhang suddenly fainted. It turned out that Sun Wen used Aunt Zhang as the next batch of cultivation cauldrons. The principle of the 5 elements soul refining technique was actually similar to the blood-thorn grass. It was to absorb other people's soul and essence to strengthen oneself. It was precisely because Sun Wen came into contact with the blood-thorn grass that he comprehended the 5 elements soul refining technique. Because Aunt Zhang had taken the spirit cultivation pill, the remaining spirit energy in her body attracted Sun Wen's attention. Fortunately, Chen Shi noticed the abnormality in time and insisted on coming to Aunt Zhang's home to take a look. Otherwise, Aunt Zhang was afraid that she would inevitably follow in Zhao Guifen's footsteps. After putting down Sun Wen, Chen Shi also saved Zhao Guifen. Therefore, when he took the little fellow to dig bamboo shoots in the bamboo forest, a series of firecrackers suddenly sounded not far away. Wasn't it from Zhao Guifen's house? Looking at the situation, it was probably to celebrate Zhao Guifen's not crazy anymore. Zhao Guifen had a younger sister named Zhao Guixiang. She was Zhao Guifen's only relative in this world. The relationship between the two sisters was very good. Zhao Guifen had been crazy for so long, but Zhao Guixiang did not leave her and stayed at her house to take care of her. Early this morning, when Zhao Guixiang was about to help Zhao Guifen get up and wash up, Zhao Guifen suddenly called out her name, Guixiang. These 2 short words made Zhao Guixiang's eyes fill with tears on the spot. She hugged her sister and burst into tears. There was a custom in the countryside, which was to set off firecrackers when there was a joyous occasion. The firecrackers in Zhao Guifen's house sounded for a long time. In less than half an hour, the entire village knew that Zhao Guifen was no longer crazy. The crazy woman was no longer crazy, and everyone was happy for her. Zhao Guixiang was so happy that she even informed the entire village that she was going to hold a pig slaughtering feast to celebrate her sister's recovery. Aunt Zhang's family also received Zhao Guixiang's invitation. However, just when everyone was happy for Zhao Guifen's recovery, Chen Shi sighed silently. Zhao Guifen had lost her yang soul for a long time. Even he could only temporarily restore Zhao Guifen's consciousness and could not save her life. It was estimated that before the pig slaughtering feast began, Zhao Guixiang would have to change the funeral for her sister. Zhao Guifen was also a pitiful person. The culprit of everything was Sun Wen. Although Sun Wen was a talent, his unscrupulous behavior of disregarding human life also aroused Chen Shi's disgust. Therefore, when the little fellow volunteered to wash the winter bamboo shoots, Chen Shi found Qin Shuetching and asked in detail how Wu Lian would deal with Sun Wen. After all, he was a diviner, so Wu Lian obviously only had one way to deal with Sun Wen. That was to persuade him to surrender and recruit him. As long as Sun Wen was willing to join the Wu Lian, then Wu Lian would be able to let bygones be bygones. This also made Chen Shi very dissatisfied. He thought that Wu Lian would dissect Sun Wen for research, but he did not expect to get this result. Chapter 223. How to deal with Sun Wen had become a problem. It would be a pity to kill him, but it would be difficult to resolve the hatred in his heart if he didn't kill him. Using living people to cultivate and turning them into idiots was an evil art that went against the harmony of the heavens. He would definitely suffer retribution. Chen Shi was probably Sun Wen's savior. Since that was the case, Chen Shi could only enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and let Sun Wen experience Zhao Guifen's pain. Thus, Chen Shi specially refined a pill for Sun Wen. For this reason, he even used a bit of blood-thorn grass. It could be said that wool comes from a sheep's back. Heart-devouring ants. However, they weren't ants. They were a type of pill, or rather, poison. When someone consumed this pill, they would feel as if their entire body was being bitten by fire ants every half an hour. The heart-wrenching pain didn't come from the body, but from the soul. Thus, it couldn't be described with words. It was densely packed, as if every inch of their skin was being burned by fire and pierced by needles. Every time the pill took effect, the poisoned person would feel a pain worse than death. They could only lie on the ground weakly, struggling and praying for the pill's effect to pass quickly. This pill came from the most poisonous sect in Heavenly Spiral. It was also developed by them to punish disciples who committed grave mistakes. It didn't harm their lives, but it also made them feel a pain worse than death. It made them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts, and they would never dare to commit the same mistake again. Although this pill couldn't kill people, it was said that many disciples couldn't withstand the endless heart-wrenching torture and chose to commit suicide to seek relief. He didn't know if Sun Wen could withstand this kind of torture. Xianxia only hoped that Sun Wen could be strong and not be played to death. If Sun Wen died, it might really be a great loss to the Wu Yan. Lunch was authentic farmhouse food. Because Auntie Zhang's house didn't have any natural gas or induction cookers, the old house naturally used a firewood stove. Perhaps it was a psychological effect, but the food made from the firewood stove seemed to be exceptionally fragrant. The little fellow sniffed and picked up a piece of bamboo shoot. After tasting it, she immediately pointed at the plate of bamboo shoots fried with meat and laughed happily. "I dug this. Good, good, good. Let's see what you're capable of. Come, eat more." Auntie Zhang smiled and patted her little head. After giving her a piece of lean meat, she gestured for her to sit properly. It had been a long time since the old house had been so lively. Aunt Zhang's family of 3, Little Bean's family of 3, Chen-Xi's family of 3, and Qin Xueching's family of 3, this meal was really lively. The table was filled with authentic farmhouse dishes. The little girl giggled as she ate. She seemed to have completely forgotten that she was insisting on going home just a moment ago. In fact, not only were the vegetables delicious, even the rice was exceptionally delicious. This was because Auntie Zhang's cooking utensils were not electric cookers, but retorts. It was the 21st century. Every household used an electric cooker to cook rice, so many people didn't even know what a retorter was. In the past, a wooden bucket was used to cook rice, and that bucket was called a retorter. The rice steamed with a retorter was called retorted rice, and the taste was completely different from the rice steamed in an electric cooker. Steaming rice in an electric cooker was very simple. Put an appropriate amount of rice and water in it, cover it with a lid, and wait for the meal. But retorted rice was different. Before the electric cooker was popularized, steaming rice was actually a very troublesome thing. It also required a certain amount of experience and skill. Otherwise, if one was careless, the steamed rice would be half-cooked, or the steamed rice would be extremely hard with no moisture at all. Many people felt that retorted rice was hard, but in fact, this was because the steamed rice was not good enough. They didn't steam the rice with the right amount of softness and richness. Now, generally, only restaurants used retorts to cook rice. This was the first time the little fellow had eaten this kind of rice, so naturally, she felt that the rice was exceptionally fragrant. After lunch, the sister-in-law left with the Yida bottle that Chen-Xi gave her. The toxicity of the heart-eating ant would attack every half an hour, and each attack lasted about 5 minutes. The Yida bottle contained the antidote, and one pill could suppress the toxicity for a day. The toxicity of this antidote was so strong that once it took effect, it could do nothing but lie on the ground and struggle. Wu Yan still counted on Sun Wen to do things, so Chen-Xi naturally had to give him an antidote to suppress the toxicity. Letting Sun Wen earn the antidote through good performance was like giving a sweet date after a slap. This was the highest level of controlling people. Sun Wen's problem was solved, but the little fellow's problem was not. Although she was still smiling when eating, if she didn't find anything fun in the afternoon, she would probably curse at night. Qianxi pondered for a moment, and after saying goodbye to Qin Ruoying, he took the little fellow to the river. It was still very cold in the valley at the beginning of spring. The little girl was wearing a thick down jacket and a cotton cap. She was wrapped up tightly, only revealing a small pink face. As soon as she arrived at the valley, she stepped on the big stones and skipped to the river. Then, she squatted on the stone and carefully reached out to touch the cold river water. She had never been to the river before, so of course, she was very excited. Chapter 224. Fishing was a very sentimental leisure activity. People who liked to fish might not even like to eat fish. The so-called fishing was actually just to enjoy the process. Basking in the warm sun of early spring, sitting on a big stone in the valley, listening to the sound of running water, a broken pole could be sat on for a long time. The kind of immersion in the mountains and rivers, leisurely enjoying the natural quiet pleasure, once experienced once, was likely to be addictive. Anyone who likes fishing may have the same feeling. No matter if it's windy or raining, cold or freezing, no matter if it's hot or unbearable, they are not afraid of the storm or the muddy road. As long as they were free, they would spare no effort to find a good place. Even if they had to run dozens of miles, they would find a good place to fish quietly. Unfortunately, such a good place was not very easy to find now. These days, as long as there was abundant water, there would be a hydropower station. Hydropower stations promoted economic development and provided abundant electricity for the local area, but imperceptibly, it seriously affected the local ecological environment. Most of the rivers in the past had now become small streams. The branch of the Qingyi River in front of Qianxi was only 51 kilometers long, but there were as many as 17 small hydropower stations built on this river. On average, there was a small hydropower station every 3 kilometers of the river. The dam of the hydropower station blocked the river, so that the downstream water flow was sharply reduced. The survival environment of the aquatic creatures was extremely bad, so the population was sharply reduced. Rare animals like the giant salamander were already on the verge of extinction. As for the flood, this kind of situation was rarely seen anymore. The father and daughter sat on the stone for an afternoon. The little fellow seemed to like this activity very much. She swung the pole to fish, bit the line and lifted the pole. This set of actions was learned well. Qianxi did not bring a bucket, so he built a diving pool with small stones by the river. Any fish caught would be put into this pool by him. After an afternoon, there were no less than 20 fish in this pool. The little guy reached his hand into the water and constantly frightened the fish in the water. Seeing the fish quickly spinning around in the puddle but unable to swim out, the little guy was so happy that he started to giggle. This was her and her father's trophy. At 5:00 in the afternoon, Qianxi took the little fellow to count the number of fish. There were a total of 23 fish, but they were all small fish. Among them, the biggest one was actually the one that the little fellow had just fished up. It could be considered her good start. 23. Papa, we caught 23 fish. The little thing squatted beside the puddle and kept fiddling with the water. After Qianxi taught her how to count the fishes in the water one by one, 2, 3, 4, 5, the little fellow was so excited that she jumped up and down on the rock. Looking at her cute little face, Qianxi couldn't help but reach out and pinch it. It was smooth, delicate, and elastic. How was it? Was fishing fun? Fun. The little girl nodded her head vigorously. She was probably looking forward to her father bringing her here to play tomorrow. It's fine as long as it's fun, but the wind here is getting stronger and stronger. If we sit by the river for too long, we'll catch a cold, so we should go home. Daddy will bring you here to play tomorrow, okay? Hearing this, the little fellow tilted his head and pondered for a moment, then nodded and replied, N. Then let's bring the fish home. Seeing this, Xianxia rubbed her head and said with a smile, "These fish are too small to be eaten. It's useless for us to take them home. Let's put them all away. When they grow up, we'll come back to fish again. How about it?" "No." After hearing Xianxia's words, the little thing was suddenly unhappy. She curled her lips and glanced at the small fish in the puddle, then muttered loudly, "These are my fish." This little thing was still talking about her trophies. Therefore, Xianxia had no choice but to squat beside the little girl and talk to her about the big picture. Perhaps she was persuaded by Xianxia. The little fellow hesitated for a long time before reluctantly putting the biggest fish into the plastic bag. Then she reached into the water and dug a hole in the puddle. The fish noticed the movement of the water and immediately went out of the hole, successfully returning to the river. The little fellow looked down at the empty puddle in front of her and did not come back to her senses for a long time. When Xianxia saw her like this, he immediately put the plastic bag in front of her with a smile. "Nian Nian, look, there's another one here. Mine." The little fellow snatched the plastic bag from Xianxia's hand. Looking at her posture, she was probably afraid that Xianxia would let the last one go. When the father and daughter returned to the old house, dinner had not yet started. The little fellow carried her trophies and ran into the kitchen, ready to show off in front of her grandmother and mother. Qin Ruoying was learning how to cook from Auntie Zhang. When the two of them saw the fish in her bag, they immediately laughed. A few words of praise had made this little thing's tail almost to the sky. There was still some time before dinner. Xianxia was afraid that the little fellow would not be able to sit still, so he called her to the yard. The little fellow was a little confused, but Xianxia did not explain to her. Instead, he took out a brazier from the old house and used a pair of tongs to pick up a few pieces of burning charcoal on the stove. Everything was ready. Xianxia called the little fellow and asked with a smile, "Nian Nian, do you like to eat potatoes?" "Yes. I like to eat potatoes and pork ribs." "Then wait a minute. Daddy will treat you to roast potatoes, okay?" "Roast potatoes?" The little fellow blinked her eyes. When it came to eating, she immediately became excited. Then, Xianxia took 2 potatoes from the kitchen and threw them directly into the brazier without even washing them. Potatoes, corn, wheat, and rice were listed as the 4 main staple foods in the world. It could be cooked in a variety of ways, whether it was fried, stewed, or steamed. The most common way to eat potatoes was to fry them. As for eating them directly like Xianxia, it was very rare to see potatoes being eaten directly in the fire. It was not because roasted potatoes were not delicious, but because it was inconvenient to start a fire. He could not roast potatoes on the gas stove just to eat a roasted potato. This novel way of cooking successfully attracted the little fellow's interest. Therefore, she obediently squatted side by side with Xianxia under the eaves, guarding the brazier, and quietly waiting for the potatoes to be cooked. The potatoes were cooked quickly. Xianxia took the tongs and picked up the 2 potatoes that had been roasted to the point of being burnt. When the little fellow saw the dirty and shabby appearance of the potatoes, she immediately wrinkled her little nose in disgust. Xianxia rolled the potatoes on the ground to lower the temperature of the potatoes. When the temperature of the potatoes dropped slightly, he picked up a piece and tore off the burnt part of the potato bit by bit in front of the little fellow. The potatoes were burnt black, and the skin was very brittle. When he tore it off, a piece fell off. When the burnt skin was torn off by Xianxia, a crystal-clear potato was hidden under the shabby surface. Light smoke rose from the already ripe potatoes, constantly emitting a refreshing fragrance. There was no need for salt or MSG. After roasting them, they could be eaten directly in the hand. With one bite, the soft and light taste could really melt a person's heart. In the quiet village, the distant mountains were like black, and the spring water was singing softly. A faint magnolia fragrance came with the breeze and lingered in the courtyard. The father and daughter each held a big potato and sat under the eaves of the old house to gnaw on it. Chapter 225. Since they came to the countryside, they naturally had to experience the unique market in the countryside. Going to the market was also called going to the market. The coastal area was called going to the void, the area in Jianghu was called going to the street, and the area in Lingnan was called going to the business. The names were slightly different, but they all had the same meaning. Going to the market was also a unique product. The so-called going to the market meant that there was a fixed period of trade in remote places. When the time came, buyers and sellers would come from all over and gather at a certain place to buy and sell. There were not that many shopping malls and small stores in the countryside, so the government could only set a time. Then, everyone would gather at this time to exchange materials and buy biological products in the town. A place like Jianghu was not considered remote. It was adjacent to the 108 National Highway, but there was still only one small store. It could only sell small things like oil, salt, sauce, vinegar, snacks, and firecrackers. If the villagers wanted to buy clothes and farm tools, they either had to drive to the county or wait until the market. The town where Jianghu was located was called Siping Village. The market in Siping Village was on 3, 6, and 9. That meant that there would be a market on the 3rd, 13th, and 23rd of every month. There were a total of 9 times a month. It was not too many, but it was not too few either. If a driver often drove through the town, the most annoying situation was not to encounter livestock or children blocking the road, but to coincidentally encounter the market. Usually, there were not many people in the town, but on the day of the market, it would be particularly lively. There would be people coming and going. Not to mention driving, it would be difficult to squeeze through by walking, therefore, whenever it was time to go to the market, there would always be a traffic jam in the town for half a day. February 26th. It was only 8:30 in the morning, but the family of 7 was happily waiting on the side of the road. It was as if they were waiting for a taxi. They chatted while waiting for the passenger van from the various towns and counties to pass by. The passenger van was also a product of the era. Now, the slightly more developed areas had already banned the operation of the van. Therefore, the passenger van could only be seen in this kind of backward small county. This kind of van was also called the Chang'an car. Everyone felt that the Chang'an brand was the most practical, so it was called that. The Chang'an car was the most common minivan. It could carry 7 people. It was dyed green and yellow with a certificate in front of the window. It was considered an officially recognized operating vehicle. The biggest problem with the van was that it was overloaded. Because you never know how many people would come out of the van, it was normal for a 7-seater van to have 12 or 13 people in it. Xianxi's family didn't want to squeeze in, so they spent 200 yuan to rent a van and enjoyed the special treatment of a car. Siping village was very lively now. When they were 1 or 2 kilometers away from the village, they could see countless villagers carrying bags of various sizes going back and forth on the 108 National Highway. The little fellow leaned on the sliding door and looked at the scenery outside the window with interest. Most of the villagers in the south lived in scattered places. They would only gather in the towns on the day of the market. The little fellow had lived in the countryside for a few days and was used to the sparse population in the countryside. She was not used to seeing so many people all of a sudden. Looking at the bustling atmosphere in the village, it was somewhat similar to a temple fair. There were a lot of people going to the market in the morning, so the driver had to stop 1 kilometer away from the village. If he went any further, he might not even be able to find a place to turn around. The driver was also a smart person. After Xianxi's family got out of the car, he asked for Xie Pinglin's phone number and prepared to earn another sum of money later. Smartphones were widely available now. As soon as the family of 7 walked into the village, they saw a huge Oppo store and a Vivo store next door. The 2 brothers were really inseparable wherever they went. Outside the 2 smartphone stores, a blacksmith was selling farming tools such as plowing, raking, plowing, sickles, hoes, and so on that he had made himself. This was a miniature version of the countryside in Wuxia. The market was spread out along the streets of the town, from the beginning of the village to the end of the village. There were stalls on both sides of the road. It was lively, and there were shouts and bargaining everywhere. However, most of the things sold here were necessities or livestock, feed, farming tools, and other things that were closely related to the lives of farmers. The little girl sat in Xianxi's arms. Standing high, she could see far, so she immediately saw a different sugar painting stall. Sugar painting was also a traditional craft among the people of Wuxia. It used brown sugar and white sugar to draw the 12 zodiac signs. You could spin it for 2 yuan. Whatever you spun, you could take it and make it on the spot. It was really delicious and fun. The little girl looked at it for a while and could not take her eyes off it. Therefore, she sat in Xianxi's arms and twisted her small body as she shouted. Her luck was not bad. After 3 spins, she actually spun a dragon. The little thing was overjoyed on the spot and laughed at the top of her voice. Seeing the master make it on the spot and draw a dragon with his bare hands, the little thing's eyes were about to pop out. When the master was done with the sugar painting, she held the dragon in one hand and the rat in the other. The remaining dog was fed to Xianxi. Aunt Zhang watched with a smile on her face. Ever since the little thing was accompanied by her parents, even the smile on her face was more than before. Just as the family surrounded the sugar painting stall and praised the sugar painting master's skills with laughter, there was suddenly a commotion on the other side of the road. Looking at the sound of gongs, drums, and firecrackers, it seemed that someone was picking up the bride. When the little girl heard the commotion, she immediately shouted for Xianxi to pick her up to take a look. Sure enough, as the sound of gongs and drums got closer, a wedding procession appeared in the little girl's line of sight. The wedding procession's formation was impressive. In front, there were gongs and drums to clear the way, followed by a palanquin with 8 carriers. Along the way, the villagers all retreated to the sides of the road to make enough aisle for the wedding procession. The wedding procession forcibly crossed the entire Siping village just like that. Looking at the formation, it seemed a little too ostentatious. In fact, what the villagers really avoided was not the palanquin and the folk band, but the dozens of young people following behind the palanquin. These young people carried a few large loudspeakers and sang Zhang Yu's "For You" loudly as they walked. It must be a special fate that allowed us to become a family along the way. The more you love her, the more she will return the favor. Find the possibility of happiness. Their voices were very loud, and in the end, they directly suppressed the bustle of the market, so much so that the transactions on the entire street temporarily stopped. Only the singing of "For You" could be heard, as if they were singing the national anthem. The villagers all moved to the sides of the street and silently watched them pass by. The little girl had never seen such a formation before. She immediately sat in Xianxi's arms and exclaimed, "Wow!" Chapter 226. Gongs and drums cleared the way, and firecrackers sounded. Behind the 8 sedan chairs, there were dozens of people singing "For You." Marriage was always a joyous occasion, but the attitude of this group of troublesome youngsters was not very good. They clearly chose to get married on the day of the market, which affected the normal trade of the villagers, but as long as these young people saw someone blocking the sedan chair, they would immediately rush over and yell at the other person to get out of the way. It seemed that in their dictionary, there was no such thing as communication and discussion. An old man probably had bad hearing, but he still stood on the side of the road with a backpack on his back, thinking about what he should buy back. When the young people saw this, they immediately went forward and dragged the old man to the side. It had to be said that these young people were indeed young people. Fortunately, they met an easygoing old man today. Otherwise, if the old man directly fell to the ground, they would not be able to afford it even if they sold them by the weight. As the wedding procession continued to go deeper, more and more people came to the market. In the end, the sedan chair and the folk band could no longer maintain the original speed. Seeing this, the group of young people carried the sound system to the front, and then let them open the way. Like the heavy cavalry of the Middle Ages, the young people carried the sound system, with the momentum of a fierce tiger coming down the mountain, and forcibly tore open a passage in the lively market. "Get out of the way, we brothers are getting married, don't block the way." Brothers, Chuanyu dialect, means big brother, get out of the way, ha ha ha, if you don't get out of the way, do you believe that I won't smash your stall? Get out of the way. Their aggressive posture was quite a bit of the temperament of a local hooligan and street gangster. Those who did not know would think that this street was built by them. Seeing this group of tyrannical young people like the god of plague, the villagers in the market all retreated to the sides of the street, making a spacious passage for them. For a moment, the market that was very lively just now was now only the sound of the sound system and gongs and drums that were still echoing. Seeing this, Chen Shi and his family also retreated to the side of the road and quietly waited for the wedding procession to come from the town. The little fellow did not find the atmosphere strange because she was very interested in the palanquin. Thus, she stretched her neck like a giraffe and stared at the palanquin. This group of young people probably thought that they were soldiers. Escorting the bride was like winning a battle. When they saw that no one dared to stand in front of the group, they proudly sang, "For you." In fact, most of these young people were locals. Among the commoners who came to the market, there might be their relatives and elders. However, these youngsters had always lacked discipline. They were used to being unbridled and had no respect for their elders. When they were angered, they could even beat their parents. Naturally, no one dared to stand out and say a few words to them. After all, the children in the countryside lost at the starting line. While the parents of the children in the city were considering which school to choose for their children and which specialty classes to attend, the children in the countryside were still catching grasshoppers in the vast wheat fields, digging for eels, and going to the mountains to catch birds and steal melons. Most of the people in the countryside did not have much education. Junior high school education was already very good. Although the 9-year compulsory education had been popularized, many parents in the countryside still did not have a full understanding of the importance of education. If the child did not want to study, they would find a way for the child. And the so-called way was actually not a good way. Those with better conditions could go to the army, and those with worse conditions could go out to work, either in construction sites, restaurants, hair salons, or car repair shops. In short, wherever people were needed, they would be there. The salary was not high. It was enough to get enough food and clothing in the big city. Of course, there were also many children in the countryside who made a name for themselves. If they were smart, diligent, and sensible, they might find their own way after 3 to 5 years and start their own business. In the end, they might even be more successful than many highly educated people in the city. But such people were always in the minority. Gold would always shine, but the most common thing in the gold beach was still the inconspicuous gravel. Those who could go out to work were already very diligent and sensible. There were also some rural children who, because of the lack of discipline, were lazy all day long. In the end, they became slackers who did nothing all day long, just like the group of young people in front of them. They were the so-called ruffians in the countryside. There was no lack of ruffians anywhere, even in remote places. In the past, the ruffians in the countryside did not see much of the world, so most of them only knew how to make a fuss. It was not until Young and Dangerous was released that they were truly taught how to be a proper ruffian. The Young and Dangerous series of movies had a far greater impact on rural children than ordinary people could imagine. Even if the series had been released for more than 10 or 20 years, it still distorted the values of many young people. At its peak, the 3 words, Chen Haonan, were second only to QQ. It also made chasing girls, one-on-one, and slashing people, the 3 most popular things among young people. Unruly people came from barren lands. A few years ago, other than the popularity of Young and Dangerous, there was also a coal mining boom. Many coal bosses came from the surrounding villages. The coal bosses were rich and powerful, so they quickly recruited them and turned them into their own thugs. Therefore, these young people followed behind their so-called brothers all day long to make a living. When the brothers were free, they would give them some money for cigarettes and they would give their lives to others. This was the loyalty they learned from the movies. Today was the big day when the brothers were getting married. As brothers, of course, they would come to help the brothers. Tie up, in Sichuan and Chongqing dialect, meant to support the wedding. Dozens of hooligans were aggressively walking on the street. How could the honest villagers dare to bear the brunt of the attack? In desperation, everyone had to stop trading and obediently retreat to the sides of the street. Then, they anxiously hoped that this group of plague gods would leave quickly. It was obviously a joyous occasion, but now it was like they were sending off the plague gods. However, the young people did not feel the slightest bit of awareness. Instead, they were extremely proud. The few who walked at the front were like straight crabs with their heads held high. They were just short of using their nostrils to look at the road. The wedding procession was very fast. It did not take long for them to cross the entire Siping village and then walk past Qianxi's family. The little girl looked at the palanquin that was getting closer and closer. She could not help but mutter with anticipation, "Papa, I also want to sit in the palanquin." Hearing this, Qianxi pinched her little face and asked with a smile, "Well, in the future, you will sit in the palanquin. Papa will carry the palanquin for you, okay?" "Okay. Papa will carry the palanquin in front. Mama will carry the palanquin in the back. I will sit inside." After hearing Qianxi's words, the little girl immediately pointed at the palanquin bearers and giggled. This little thing has even arranged the mission. However, just as the father and daughter were laughing and chatting, a few young people in the wedding procession turned to look at them. They first glanced at the little girl, then looked at Qianxi. Finally, their eyes fell on Qin Ruoying. It had to be said that Qianxi's family's appearance was really outstanding. Their style was completely different from the local people, especially in such a small and remote place like this. Women of Qin Ruoying's level were as rare as pandas. It was estimated that these young people would not see such a beautiful woman in their lifetime. Therefore, just like the chairman's military parade, all the young people who passed by Qianxi's family could not help but look at Qin Ruoying a few more times. That figure, that face, that temperament, it was really amazing. The turn of events was too sudden, so much so that the people around were stunned for a while before they finally regained their senses. They hurriedly squatted beside the young man and used a lot of effort to pull him up from the ground. "Spring Baby? Is there no problem?" The young man who was known as Spring Baby had suffered a heavy slap in the face. Although Qianxi had already shown mercy, he still made his head faint for a short while. After lying on the ground to recover for a while, he finally covered his head and stood up with the help of his companions. Spring Baby looked to be in his early 20s. He was not tall and was almost half a head shorter than Qianxi. He looked thin and thin. In Chuanyu dialect, he was as thin as a chicken. However, although this chicken's physical fitness was not very good, his temper was very irritable. After he stood up shakily, a trace of viciousness flashed across Spring Baby's face. Then, he roared at Qianxi and said, "F***CKU. B****. How dare you hit me?" After saying that, Spring Baby carried an aura like a ferocious beast that had been released from its cage. He glared and clenched his fists, charging directly toward Qianxi. The young man was arrogant and thought that he could defeat anyone with a fierce force. But to be honest, with their bodies that had long been exhausted by cigarettes and alcohol, not to mention that the person standing opposite was Chen Shi. Even a middle-aged uncle who had been farming all year round on the street could probably defeat him with one hand. Therefore, when Spring Baby rushed toward Chen Shi, he was instantly kicked back by Chen Shi. Spring Baby was also lucky because today's occasion was different. Aunt Zhang and the little girl were watching from the side, so Chen Shi was very gentle. With one kick, other than sending Spring Baby flying, Chen Shi did not break several of Zhao Yuan's ribs like the last time he kicked Zhao Yuan. Chen Shi showed mercy, but Spring Baby did not have the slightest awareness in this regard. After being supported by his companions behind him, he spat on the ground fiercely and then took out a butterfly knife from his trouser pocket. As the saying goes, the unreasonable are afraid of the reckless, and the reckless are afraid of the reckless. This kind of hooligan in his early 20s happened to be in the final stage of his Chinibu syndrome. For young people like them who had wine today, they would drink today and worry about tomorrow. The two words fear and regret never existed in their dictionaries. As long as their temper flared up, they could really do anything. Perhaps when they calmed down afterward, they would also feel afraid, but at the moment of the incident, there was definitely only one word in their minds: just do it. Moreover, this was his territory, and there were dozens of brothers standing behind him. If he admitted defeat now, how could he survive in the underworld in the future? Since he could not win with his fists and feet, Spring Baby naturally had to show his knife. Get out of the way. I'm going to kill him today. No one stopped him, and a few of his quick-witted companions even quietly took a few steps to the side. All of this happened very suddenly. When Aunt Zhang finally came back to her senses and wanted to stop it, Spring Baby had already taken the butterfly knife and slashed towards Chen Shi. Chen Shi did not want the little girl to see the cruel side of the adult world, so he used his left hand to support the little girl's butt, while his right hand gently pressed the back of the little girl's head, making her obediently lie on his shoulder and not turn her head. The little girl blinked her eyes, somewhat unable to understand what was going on with her father. However, she was very obedient. After hearing Chen Shi's instructions, she wrapped her arms around Chen Shi's neck, and then obediently rested her chin on Chen Shi's shoulder. Then, the little girl heard a strange sound. First, there was a crisp "ka" sound, then the "clang-clang" sound of a knife falling to the ground, and finally Spring Baby's earth-shattering scream. When he pulled up the curtain, he could vaguely see that there was a woman in a wedding robe in the palanquin, tidying up her clothes. The man adjusted his belt as he strode in the direction of Chun Hua. When he saw Chun Hua's dislocated arm, the man did not even say a word of concern and directly kicked her. Then, he shouted at the person next to Chun Hua, "Why are you standing here with your claws? Hurry up and take her to the hospital." Chun Hua was in so much pain that she was drenched in cold sweat. After being kicked, she pursed her lips and did not even dare to make a sound. She lowered her head and walked toward the village clinic with the help of her companions. After Chun Hua left, the man turned around and came in front of Chen Shi's family. This person was estimated to be less than 40 years old, but he had a domineering aura. When he stood there, he naturally gave off a feeling of power without being angry. Ever since he appeared, the streets had become completely silent. It could be seen that this person's aura was so strong that it was not something that ordinary people could reach. Compared to him, Chen Shi seemed a little too ordinary. When the man came in front of Chen Shi's family, the young people behind him immediately surrounded Chen Shi's family in an umbrella shape. Looking at their posture, it seemed that as long as the old man gave the order, they would immediately rush up and beat Chen Shi up. The young people showed an eager look, but after the man took a deep look at Chen Shi, he turned around and returned to the palanquin. Motherf **Ker, the guests are about to arrive, and you guys are still here causing trouble for me. Hurry up and leave. The man ordered, and the bridal escort team set off again. With their departure, the market also returned to its previous bustle. It was as if nothing had happened. Seeing this, Aunt Zhang couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Then she came to Chen Shi's side and began to blame him for being insensible. He actually fought with people on the street. Just when Aunt Zhang was complaining, the owner of the sugar painting stall said to them carefully, "Are you from out of town? Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't waste any more time here. Hurry back." Asterisk 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 asterisk. Digression. The prototype of this story is a relative of mine. He didn't even graduate from primary school. In 2010, he was a scum of society who couldn't even pay back 8,000 yuan. He went to prison for 3 years, but he was chosen by the boss of the construction bureau. In 3 years, he turned from negative assets to a millionaire. When he was building the Yashi Expressway, he rented a sand mine. Now, he is a big boss with tens of millions of assets. Why? He is a village boy with no background. The big boss is not related to him. Why did he choose him? If you don't know something, it can only mean that you are not experienced enough, so don't come out to show ignorance, okay? Also, the countryside I rode is different from the countryside you know. Then I want to ask, the country is divided into north and south, mountainous and coastal areas, 23 provinces, 2 special administrative regions, 5 autonomous regions, 4 municipalities directly under the central government, 282 prefecture-level cities, 374 county-level cities, and countless towns, streets, and communities. How many have you been to? Can you represent the country? Chapter 229. On the bustling Siping Street, a strange atmosphere faintly pervaded the air. The fight just now did not last long, but it caused quite a stir. The wedding procession had already left, but the surrounding villagers were still pointing at Chen Shi's family and gossiping. The sugar painting stall's boss was an honest person. Seeing that they were outsiders who did not understand the situation, he cautiously advised them to leave quickly and not stay here any longer. Aunt Zhang was already so old, but she could not withstand such a scare, so she frowned on the spot. The sugar painting stall's boss's serious expression did not seem like he was joking with them. This also made Aunt Zhang realize the seriousness of the problem, so after thinking for a while, she called everyone to prepare to go home. However, when the little fellow heard that Aunt Zhang wanted to go home, she immediately pulled Qin Ruoying's hand, raised her little head and shouted loudly, "I haven't played here yet. I'll go home after playing." Seeing this, Chen Shi could only helplessly shake his head, then squatted down and used a negotiating tone to say to the little fellow, "Nian Nian, you see, there's nothing fun here, let's go back. Daddy will bring you up the mountain to catch some birds later, okay?" Hearing this, the little fellow pouted her little mouth and muttered in dissatisfaction, "No. It's fun here. Let's play here." As she said that, she wanted to break free from Qin Ruoying's hand and was prepared to walk on the streets by herself, but she was stopped by Qin Ruoying in time. This little fellow liked to be lively. When she went to the market, people came and went, and there were many stalls and shops. Now that she was here, she did not even finish walking around the street, so of course she would be unhappy. Children love to play, so naturally, she did not know what her grandmother was worried about. The husband and wife looked at each other, their expressions somewhat helpless. After all, Aunt Zhang was just an ordinary person. After seeing that they had a conflict with the hooligans, she naturally wanted to avoid them. In order to not let Aunt Zhang worry, the husband and wife could only let the little fellow suffer. Therefore, Chen Shi ignored the little one's wishes and carried her in the direction they came from. The little girl was stunned for a moment. Then, she realized that her father was going to take her away by force. So, she leaned on Chen Shi's shoulder and twisted her body with all her strength. Then, she shouted for Chen Shi to put her down. The little fellow howled and twisted for a while, but Xianxia turned a deaf ear to it. Seeing this, she could only pout her mouth and burst into tears. Looking at her tear-stained face, it would take a long time to appease her this time. Xianxia and his family left. While they were leaving, in Si Ping Hospital, Chen Huahua was trembling all over as he waited for the doctor to treat him. After a dislocated shoulder occurred, the muscles around the shoulder joint would be in a state of shock for a short period of time, so it would not be very painful when it happened. But once the shock period passed, the muscles around the arm would be in a state of spasm, causing the pain to worsen and making it very difficult to reset. Chen Huahua had now passed the shock period, and that kind of piercing pain was really unbearable for him. The doctor had just touched his arm, and Chen Huahua was already in so much pain that he cried out. Villagers often suffered dislocations when they were doing heavy work, so the doctors in the town hospital were very good at treating dislocations. The doctor first pretended to massage Chen Huahua's arm as if nothing had happened. Then, while he was crying out, the doctor suddenly grabbed his arm and twisted it skillfully. After a crisp click, the doctor reconnected Chen Huahua's arm. Although the shoulder joint was reset, the sudden sharp pain made Chen Huahua roll his eyes. It was so painful that he didn't even have the strength to cry out. "Okay, you rest first. I'll give you a splint later. Don't move around for half a month. Otherwise, it is very likely to cause ossifying myositis, and it will become a habitual dislocation in the future." After the doctor gave a few instructions, Chen Hua lay on the chair and moaned weakly. At this moment, a young man suddenly rushed in from outside the door and shouted at Chen Hua, "Third brother, that kid is running away. What should we do?" Hearing this, Spring Child suddenly jumped up from the chair with strength that came from nowhere. Then, he straightened his neck and roared angrily, "Run my ass. Chase." If he couldn't catch up, he would record the license plate number. I will definitely hack him to death. After that, he clutched his shoulder and cried out in pain. Because of this sudden interlude, Xianxia and his family could only return resentfully. The little girl cried for a long time before she finally stopped crying under Auntie Zhang's comfort. Then, she pressed her little face against the window and sulked. No matter who spoke to her, she didn't want to respond. While Lil Thing was sulking, Xianxia was also very depressed. He didn't expect that his wife would be taken advantage of when he went out shopping. He even scared Auntie Zhang and made the child cry. Everything was going wrong. These bastards thought of him as Gao Yanai, but he wasn't Lin Chong. If Auntie Zhang wasn't beside him today, he would have seen what these bastards would dare to do. The atmosphere in the car was very gloomy. No one spoke. Auntie Zhang still felt that Xianxia's way of handling things today was wrong. Those hooligans only whistled at Qin Ruoying, but Xianxia's reaction was so intense. He went up and slapped them. Of course, they had to fight. So after thinking for a while, Auntie Zhang couldn't help but scold Xianxia. Hearing this, Xianxia could only nod with a bitter face, but he didn't think so at all. Just now, he was standing by the side, but these bastards still whistled at Qin Ruoying. What if he wasn't there at that time? What if these scumbags were drinking at that time, or saw such a beautiful woman in a remote place? Could it be that they had to swallow their teeth after being taken advantage of? Why? Although it was a small matter, it involved a matter of principle, so Xianxia couldn't bear it at all. Auntie Zhang wasn't a naggy person. After saying a few more words, she sighed deeply and put this matter aside for the time being. Then, she asked the van driver about the situation. The van driver went back and forth between various towns all year round, so he was naturally clear about the surrounding matters. When he heard about the wedding procession made up of dozens of young people, he immediately smiled and said, "Haven't you heard of the name Li Diaming? He loves to do these kinds of things. Today is his wedding, so he must make it more lively." Li Diaming, the man who came out of the palanquin, was the village tyrant in this area, according to the current popular vocabulary. His father was the former high-ranking official of the Siping village party, but he had retired now. Although the village was poor, village bullies were not to be underestimated. A qualified village bully's wealth was no less than the boss of some large enterprises. There were many kinds of village bullies. Because of the country's punishment, the village bullies basically wouldn't use violence to run rampant in the village and prey on the people. They would use other places instead. For example, the village bully who openly embezzled the country's subsidies during the Wenchuan earthquake. This kind of person was the most retarded and deserved to be shot. Those who were slightly smarter would use the method of using agents to contract the forest and mineral resources in the village at a low price. The contract period would be 60 to 70 years, and it would be passed down from generation to generation. More advanced ones, such as the villages near the city, would even involve demolition. Many village bullies were the bosses of real estate companies, and the so-called employees were actually their hired thugs. Li Diaming belonged to the most intelligent type of village bully. Chapter 230. Li Diaming was not a bad person, at least much better than his father. These words were said by the people in the surrounding villages. Although Li Diaming's mouth was full of vulgarities, he was not reckless at all when he did things. Instead, he was very shrewd. His father, Li Aimin, was the previous generation's village tyrant. All day long, he was thinking about how to exploit the villagers and squeeze the people's wealth. His table manners were also very ugly, so the villagers were full of complaints and suffered unspeakably. Li Diaming grew up in Siping. He used to be a gangster that everyone disliked. But ever since he graduated from high school and was sent to the army, Li Diaming seemed to have changed into a different person. First, he contracted a gravel yard with his father's help. Then, he started to dabble in forestry, coal mining, and other businesses. Li Diaming had an advantage, which was that he was not like a Pishio that only entered and did not leave. There was a surplus of labor in the rural areas, and many farmers who could not find a job had become idlers. Therefore, Li Diaming gathered all of these people together. He either led them to start businesses and become rich, or he simply let them work for him. Even if they did not do anything, Li Diaming would still pay them on time and not deduct a single cent. Since everyone had accepted Li Diaming's kindness, they naturally wouldn't speak ill of the Li family anymore. After all, a big business like a mine was not something that ordinary people could come into contact with. They did not understand the twists and turns of it. Anyway, as long as the Li family did not monopolize the profits, everyone's opinions would not be so big. At most, they would be jealous, but they would not complain all day long like before. Li Diaming was doing well in the surrounding villages, and he never hid the fact that he was rich. This was because the first Lamborghini in Rain City was his. Now that the internet was so developed, everyone knew about Lamborghini, but not many people knew the specific model. In fact, the cheapest Lamborghini Hurricane cost more than 3 million, and Li Diaming's Aventador cost more than 8 million. The roads in the countryside were very bad, and this luxury car that cost nearly 10 million could only be parked in the county as a decoration. In the words of the people, it was a table, a symbol of status. Li Diaming was very ostentatious, but he would stay in Siping for at least 300 days a year. No matter how rich he was now, he would never separate himself from the masses. He had truly achieved the goal of coming from the grassroots and going back to the grassroots. Why were there so many young people in the bridal procession joining in the fun? Wasn't it because everyone knew that following Li Diaming would be beneficial? Times have changed. Even the hooligans have become cultured. A major and battalion commander of the troops stationed at the port was accompanying his pregnant wife back to her hometown, Xuxian, to recuperate. Unexpectedly, they got into a quarrel at the train station and ended up fighting. That person wasn't a match for the battalion commander. After the battalion commander let him go, he called over 30 people to come back for revenge and severely injured the battalion commander on the spot. Originally, this matter could still be salvaged. However, after the camp commandant was sent to the hospital, these hooligans did not allow the doctors to save him. As a result, the treatment was delayed and the camp commandant died from excessive blood loss. This incident even alarmed the central government at that time. The Chengdu military district was transferred to the Yuezhou military district, and then to the troops stationed in the port. Finally, an investigation team was set up to clean up Chu County from beginning to end. Chen Hua did not know Chen Shi's identity, but even if he knew, he would not care. He only knew one thing, and that was that Si Ping was his territory. No matter how powerful these outsiders were outside, as long as they were in his territory, even a dragon would have to submit to him. This was because he had the final say in this place. Chen Hua carried the machete and swaggered in front of Chen Shi. He first sized up Chen Shi from head to toe, then raised his nose and said to Chen Shi with a playful smile, "Where's your wife? Call her out and have a few drinks with us, and I can pretend that this never happened. How about it? I'm letting you off easy." Hearing this, Chen Shi looked at him expressionlessly and then said calmly, "You're still young and don't know anything, so I can give you a chance to turn over a new leaf." Chen Hua was stunned. He widened his eyes, then put on a very exaggerated expression and said loudly, "What did you say just now? I didn't hear you clearly. Come, say it again." As he spoke, he hooked his machete at Chen Shi, then tilted his head and looked like he was all ears. Seeing this, Chen Shi smiled slightly and asked, "Hands and feet, which do you think is more important?" "Important, my ass. Son of a bitch." Being ignored like this, Chen Hua was like a cat whose tail was stepped on. He held the machete and directly slashed at Chen Shi. Even though his right hand was still wrapped in plaster, his knife was still powerful and full of vigor. To be honest, Chen Hua also felt a headache when he met such a hothead. He had already put on a show. As long as Chen Shi admitted defeat and was humiliated by him, Chen Hua would naturally return home. The hooligan was not brainless. If he really hurt someone, he would have to go to the police station for a few days. Thinking about it, this was not a good deal. Therefore, Spring Child had put on such a big show mainly to scare them. However, what Chen Hua did not expect was that Chen Shi did not fall for it at all. This made him a little embarrassed. Since Chen Shi forced him to choose between his face and the police station, he could only choose the former. After all, he still had to survive in this world. If he did not even dare to slash people, how could he work for Li Diaming in the future? Slashing people was actually a very particular thing. One could not slash the aorta, head, or neck. If one wanted to slash, one should slash the hands, feet, and back. Therefore, Chen Hua's machete directly slashed at Chen Shi's right arm. The scene of blood splattering everywhere did not appear because after the machete slashed at Chen Shi's arm, it did not even cut his clothes. Chen Hua stared at the strange scene in front of him and instinctively wanted to pull out the machete to slash again. However, at this moment, Chen Shi's voice sounded again. "I feel that the hands should be more important than the feet. After all, if you don't have the hands, your daily life will be very inconvenient. If you don't have the feet, you can still install artificial limbs and sit in a wheelchair. It won't affect your daily life too much. If that's the case, then I'll help you choose." "I choose the feet." When Chen Shi's voice fell, Chen Hua had yet to come back to his senses. However, the machete in his hand had unknowingly landed in Chen Shi's hand. Then, Chen Shi took the machete and gently slashed at Chen Hua's thigh. The blade drew a cold glint in the air, flashing between Spring Child's legs before disappearing completely. It was as if nothing had happened. Chen-shi patted Chun-Wa's shoulder and then stuffed the machete back into his hand. At this moment, Chun-Wa was like a patient with Alzheimer's. He just stared blankly at Chen-shi's movements. When he saw Chen-shi hand the machete to him, he even foolishly took it. "I'll give you a chance to be a new person, but you have to remember that you must be a good person in the future because good people will be rewarded." After saying that, Chen-shi directly walked past Chun-Wa. Just as Chen-shi walked toward the more than 30 young people behind him, Chun-Wa suddenly came back to his senses. "Motherf **Ker, I'm going to kill you." Chun-Wa twisted his body and raised the machete to slash at Chen-shi's neck. However, because his movements were too fierce, he instantly lost his balance and fell to the ground. While he was falling, Chun-Wa was horrified to discover that both of his legs had been severed from the roots. Chapter 232. The machete was just an ordinary machete, but the person who used it was not an ordinary person. Chen-shi poured his quintessential essence into the blade, instantly turning this ordinary machete into the legendary dragon-slaying saber that could cut through iron like mud. Because the speed of the attack was so fast, Spring Baby did not even feel anything after his legs were cut off. Chun-Wa turned around, wanting to slash at Chen-shi again. However, due to the violent shaking, his wound burst open. He completely lost his balance and fell heavily to the ground. The sudden sharp pain from his thigh made Spring Child howl in pain. Lying on the ground, he struggled to straighten his body and take a look. Only then did he realize that both of his legs had been chopped off, and blood was still spurting out from his thighs. Looking at his broken leg slowly falling to the ground, Spring Baby immediately felt a surge of warmth in his pants. When had he ever seen such a tragic scene? Furthermore, it happened to him, therefore, this young man, who had been acting like he was the boss of the world, was actually so scared that he peed his pants. In fact, it would have been better if he hadn't seen it. When he saw that his leg had been cut off, Spring Baby was really angry, scared, and in pain, to the extent that the piercing pain caused him to faint on the spot. Seeing this, Chen-shi was very considerate and stopped the bleeding for him. Since he had promised to give Chun-Wa a chance to turn over a new leaf, then Chen-shi would not take his life. As for the broken leg, because the cut was complete, as long as it was treated in time, there was still a possibility of reattaching it. After all, Wuxia's limb replantation technique had always been world-class. However, even if it was connected, Spring Baby would not be able to jump around as lively as she was now. From the moment Spring Baby swung his knife at Chen-shi to the moment Chen-shi seized the knife and cut off Spring Baby's legs, everything happened in the blink of an eye. Spring Child spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. However, the group of youngsters he brought with him was frightened. A few of the more timid ones were so scared that they sat on the ground. After all, the local ruffians were not professional soldiers. Although they were usually noisy, when they really saw this kind of bloody scene, not many of them could keep their calm. Especially now that they were neither drunk nor intoxicated, they still had at least some rationality, so they felt incomparably scared. How was this a human? He was completely a god of death that appeared out of nowhere. He did not even say a few harsh words and directly cut off Spring Baby's legs. It had nothing to do with them in the first place. They were just friends. Could it be that they really had to take revenge for Spring Baby? What if the other party was blinded by rage and killed them? Therefore, at this moment, they ran as fast as they could. Therefore, a very funny scene suddenly appeared in the vast field. Chen-shi slowly walked along the small road in the countryside. The 30 or so people holding the weapons were scared to the point of retreating. It was not until one of the ruffians who was scared out of his wits threw away the stick in his hand that the group of people felt as if they had been splashed with a bucket of cold water. They shivered and ran toward the 108 National Highway. Seeing this, Chen-shi suddenly waved his arm, and a strong wind suddenly blew them all to the ground. Since he was here, he had to leave something for them. For example, a deep memory? When the Siping police station received the news and rushed to the scene, it was already 15 minutes later. The leader was the deputy director of the Siping police station, who was also Spring Baby's second uncle. Everything was going according to plan. Spring Baby first severely injured the person, then left 2 of his brothers to take the blame and let them arrest him. This way, he could give an explanation to the people and also let him get credit for nothing. The plan was perfect. However, when they arrived at Tong family ditch, they were completely stunned by the scene in front of them. More than 30 people were lying on the edge of the field and crying. The way he cried for his father and mother was truly heart-wrenching and tearful. On the mud path next to them, a man was sitting on a small bench and starting a fire to roast something. Spring Baby's second uncle was indeed an experienced man. When he saw that the situation was not right, he immediately took out the gun at his waist. The Siping police station only had 2 pistols, one for the director and the deputy director. They could only wear them when they were on duty. This thing was usually just a decoration. No one thought that it would come in handy one day. Spring Baby's second uncle held the pistol and carefully walked toward the young man with 3 policemen. When they were close to the young man, the deputy director suddenly found Spring Baby lying on the ground, and it was unknown whether he was alive or dead. "Spring Baby! What happened to you?" The deputy director shouted at Spring Baby, but Spring Baby was lying on the ground motionless. After taking a closer look, he realized that Spring Baby's legs had been cut off, and the nearby soil was completely dyed red with blood. This was terrible. The matter was serious. Therefore, he immediately pointed his gun at the young man and shouted, "Hands on your head and squat down. Otherwise, I will shoot." The young man was pointed at by the black muzzle, but he acted as if he did not hear it at all. After slowly flipping the potatoes in the fire with a branch, he turned his head and looked at the mountain behind the deputy director. Then, he smiled thoughtfully and said, "Don't worry, there is still 1 minute." The terrain here was steep, and most of the peaks were sharp and steep in shape. There were snowy peaks and huge glaciers everywhere. Not to mention climbing Chogori Peak, as long as one stepped into the Karakoram, the mortality rate was as high as 30% at an altitude of more than 5,000 meters. Was this not enough to make people feel intimidated? It was not famous, but the mortality rate was extremely high. Over time, Chogori Peak and the Karakoram were naturally not known by ordinary people. Why did Wu Lian want to ask Chen Shi for help? It was because that place was not a place where humans could survive at all. The desert becoming an oasis itself was ridiculous enough, but now, even the snowy mountains that had not melted for thousands of years suddenly had a large oasis. This kind of special event that did not conform to the laws of nature naturally attracted the attention of the world. Just like aliens invading Earth, if a few aliens were caught, maybe they could get some benefits from it. Therefore, after Wu Lian received the news, she had already begun to prepare and was bound to go to the area to investigate. Although his sister-in-law did not say it clearly, after Chen Shi thought about it, he immediately figured out the key, so he directly pointed out the real reason why Wu Lian asked him to help. In other words, now that place has become the focus of the world. If I go, it is very likely that I will meet people from other countries there. It should be, but their speed should not be as fast as ours. After listening, Chen Shi stood on the side of the road and carefully thought about it. The slight difference between Broad and Narrow Alley and Jianghu Alley was that Broad and Narrow Alley was renovated from an old street. Therefore, Broad and Narrow Alley's cultural heritage was much stronger than that of Jianghu Alley. Although it was also a commercial street, people could feel the unique cultural heritage of the old Chengdu city. It would take them at most an hour to finish their stroll in Jianghu, so Qianxi suggested that they go to Broad and Narrow Alley again, but the little fellow decisively rejected his suggestion. This kind of aimless wandering really didn't appeal to the child, so she clamored to go home and watch TV. After all, Aunt Zhang was old. After strolling around Jianghu, she was obviously a little tired. If they went to Broad and Narrow Alley again, the old woman would probably have to wait outside. Therefore, Qianxi had to agree to the little fellow's request to go home and watch TV. Just as the family was about to go home, Qin Ruoying's phone suddenly rang. The couple's social circle was extremely narrow, so the moment her phone rang, Qianxi could not help but turn his head to look at Qin Ruoying. "Hello? Second aunt? Ying, what have you been doing recently? Visiting Aunt Zhang in Chengdu. Oh, how is it? Is Chengdu fun?" "It's okay." Qin Ruoying looked at Qianxi thoughtfully while talking on the phone. Seeing this, Qianxi could not help but shake his head. The caller was Wang Chuanjiu. Seeing that her sister-in-law did not manage to persuade her cheap brother-in-law, Wang Chuanjiu suddenly could not sit still. Sure enough, after chatting with Qin Ruoying for a while, Wang Chuanjiu asked tentatively, "You two don't have any plans recently, right? I want to ask Qianxi for a favor. Do you think it's okay?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying smiled and said directly, "Second aunt, I can't make this decision. You can ask him directly." Oh, okay." Qin Ruoying's answer was obviously a little out of Wang Chuanjiu's expectations, so she could only laugh twice awkwardly. After all, she was not that familiar with Qianxi, so she thought of asking Qin Ruoying to ask Qianxi for help. She did not expect Qin Ruoying to directly kick the ball back to her. From this, it could be seen that Wang Chuanjiu still knew too little about this niece. Falling flowers have no words, people are as indifferent as chrysanthemums. The beauty of a book is readable. What was the most important thing for a husband and wife to get along? It was mutual respect. Qin Ruoying handed the phone to Qianxi. After Qianxi took the phone, he couldn't help but reach out and hold Qin Ruoying's hand. The couple looked at each other tacitly. Qianxi smiled and said to the phone, "Hello? Second aunt?" "Hey, Qianxi, it's like this, there's something I need your help with." "Did Yuan Qin call you just now?" "Yes, she told me briefly just now." "Are you referring to the matter of Karakoram?" Yes, did Yuan Qin not tell you clearly?" Tonight, the temperature was as low as -40 degrees Celsius, but the Rivertail Beach military base was brightly lit. A military tactical transport aircraft tore through the night sky like a giant dragon. It was not afraid of the whistling wind and snow, and it quickly slid down from a distant mountain peak. The transport aircraft landed on the runway of the military base at the Rivertail Beach. Then, 3 people walked out of the cabin. Li Taidan was wrapped in a thick military cotton-padded jacket. Although he was already mentally prepared and had put on a portable oxygen respirator, the moment he stepped out of the cabin, Li Taidan's vision suddenly blurred, and his feet immediately staggered. What did it mean to be 5,000 meters above sea level? The atmospheric pressure and oxygen content were less than half of the standard value. Even if he walked barehanded, it was equivalent to carrying 35 kilograms of weight. The aircraft had pressurization and oxygen supply devices. When cruising, the air pressure in the cabin was equivalent to about 2,500 meters above sea level. Therefore, even if he flew at an altitude of 10,000 meters, it would not affect the human body. The so-called altitude sickness was mainly caused by the sudden drop in the external air pressure, causing the pressure in the human body to increase continuously. It was like suddenly having a balloon that was constantly inflating in the body. The balloon expanded and pressed on the brain, nerves and internal organs, causing all kinds of discomfort. Therefore, even if Li Taidan was wearing an oxygen respirator, he still had difficulty breathing at this moment, and his legs felt weak. Chen Shi stood behind them. After seeing their uncomfortable appearance, he quietly released a trace of true spirit, thus slightly alleviating the discomfort of the two. A group of soldiers stood under the gangway. After seeing them walk out of the cabin, the soldiers saluted in unison. Seeing this, Chen Shi also saluted back to them, then patted Li Taidan and Xue Shuzhen, indicating them to walk faster. The terrain of the Karakoram Mountains was dangerous, and it was a place that must be fought for. Therefore, no matter how bad the environment was, there was always a border defense army stationed here. To be honest, being stationed in this place was no different from being stationed at the gate of hell. The soldiers were completely protecting the country and guarding the border with their lives. The Rivertail Beach military base was not big. It was not even as big as the fake military base in the Golden Triangle. As far as the eye could see, there was only an airport runway and 3 houses. The 3 houses looked ordinary, but the interior was full of new polystyrene insulation materials. The ground was covered with marble tiles, the windows were double-layered vacuum insulation glass, and the radiators that could be seen everywhere constantly emitted bursts of heat, keeping the indoor temperature around 20 degrees Celsius. After all, the war between Wuxia and India had been over for more than 50 years. With the growing strength of Wuxia, the living conditions of the soldiers should naturally get better and better. The soldier led Chen Shi and his group to a room similar to a conference room. There seemed to be a meeting inside. The soldier knocked on the door, and after a "please come in" came from inside, the soldier gestured to Chen Shi. Seeing this, Chen Shi did not hesitate and directly pushed the door and walked in. The conference room was very lively. With a cursory glance, there were at least 20 people sitting inside. And just as Chen Shi pushed the door open, everyone in the room cast their eyes on him. Although Li Taidan and Xue Shu did not have much experience in society, this did not mean that they did not know the ways of the world. Almost at the same time, both of them found that the atmosphere in the conference room seemed to be a bit strange, so they slowed down a little and subconsciously pulled away from Chen Shi. Because he did not want to appear too different, Chen Shi wore a military coat today for the first time. He calmly adjusted his coat and found that no one in the conference room seemed to want to talk, so he slowly scanned the people in the room and smiled. "Hello everyone, do I need to introduce myself?" Hearing this, the people in the conference room were like puppets that were touched by a mechanism, and instantly stood up in unison. Those in military uniforms saluted him, and those without military uniforms bowed slightly. Everyone saluted him at the same time and greeted him, "Mr. Chen, hello. You're tuning in to the UnparalleledSwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."